Sound check, sound check, sound check.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the planning meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and archived on the city's website, and that the presentation and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate format. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function. Boy, am I talking well today. During committee meetings, members of the committee are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to. Members of the public have 5 minutes to address the committee today. The planning committee meeting is being run as a hybrid meeting. In anticipation of the time, you'll have the option of attending committee meetings in person or virtually. Councillors won't see any changes to the process for now, and you still need to sign into eScribe for access to the agenda for votes and to get on the speakers list. For today, I'll ask for your patience during the voting process as there is a slight change in the way the results are displayed, which will take a little extra time for the system to complete. So I see Councillors Danko, Wilson, Partridge, Pearson, and myself, Councillor Johnson. We have a quorum. And Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda? Y'all might want to get a coffee right now.
Yes, there are changes. Under delegation requests, we have added 6.1, Peter DeElio, respecting 940 to 946 Beach Boulevard, which is recommendation number 2 in item 7.3 and is for today's meeting. Under consent items, we have added 7.3, the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee Report 22-005. Under 9.1, modifications and updates to existing secondary dwelling units, we have added written submissions from Ronald McCrory and the West End Home Builders Association. And under 9.2, the Municipal Comprehensive Review Official Plan Review, we have some added written submissions from D. Christopher Ashwin, Patrick and Deborah Doran, Denise O'Connor, Mary Nutter, Alicia Reed, Kathy Botello, Marianne Hudicki Thompson, Isadora Van Riemsdyk, Bill and Gail Lorimore, Rochelle Sender, Ingrid Hangemule, Teresa Gerenser, Kelly Holt, John Body, Elaine DeRuiter, Renee Perazzo, Ed and Etta Engel, Jason Hindle, Ron and Mary Seeley, Reuven Dukas, Monica Polkowski, Lynn and Rick Folks, Dee Dee Crowley, Don Edwards, Rhonda Alcock, Rick and Linda Jones, Harriet Woodside, Kevin Spears, Aaron Shacklet, Aaron Mallon, Alex Burrs, Lee Avery, Don Ryder, Cynthia Meyer, Eric Canton, Sandy Leyland, Illyria Volkancic, Ed Fothergill, Natalie Ballou, Jolene Grove, Margot May Taylor, Deb Pierce, Ebru Karanovich, and Demir Sabista, Wynn Andrus, Jill Tonini, Chris Kajansky, Doug Rich, Patty Harding, Lori Cefaloni, Margot Oliveri, Rob Stovall, Lynn McClellan, Rose Jansen, Nancy Hurst, Karen Pingree, Melinda Patterson, Simon Woodside, Zoe Green, Gord and Angie McNulty, Laura Katz, Connor Harris, Craig Burley, Ian Cook, Warren Caldwell, Graham Roebuck, William Hill, Jan Jansen, John McBrien, Harry Muga, and Elizabeth Cruikshank Muga, Emily Cam, Michelle Webb, Marion Redmond, Doris Keys, Kay Chornock, Lauren Tyndall, Patricia Baker, Mark Forler, Nani Iller, Debbie Edwards and Rick Sersenik, Lynn Prince, Stephen Rumpf, Lori Nilsson, Aden Emmer, Chong Long, Corbett Land Strategies, Alan Walsh, Nicole Smith, Laura Cox, the Cadillac Fairview Corporation Limited, Sedana Holdings and 2474314 Ontario Inc., Michelle Tom, Ken Stone, Marie Covert, Joe Miner, Hammer GP LP and Hammer GP Services Corps, Liz Koblick, Isabel Belanger, Frances Murray, Catherine Cowan, Duncan Appleford, Susan Wortman, Donna Spur, Spencer Steenberg, and Andrea Abascara, as well as added registered delegations from John Corbett and Nick Wood, both with Corbett Land Strategies, as well as Linda Lukasik with Environment Hamilton, and Craig Burley.
So it has been moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Partridge to approve the agenda as amended. Are there any discussions, comments, concerns? If there are none, please vote accordingly. Thank you. And we're under declarations of interest. Before we begin, I just wanted to remind everybody of quorum purposes. Councillor Partridge does have a few meetings she's going to be popping in and out for. If anyone else has any commitments, please let me know ahead of time because we really need to keep our quorum status. Thank you, Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for mentioning that. I will need to leave by 10 to 12 for a police services meeting and another meeting following that, so I may not be popping in and out. I may not be back. No pressure, just wanted to let you know. Thanks.
Just giving you a little out there. Okay, fine. Any other conflict of interest? Councillor Ferguson.
Not a conflict of interest. I had a constituent meeting that went longer than I'd hoped, but I'm on now and I'm here to stay.
Oh, good.
So if you get a clerk just to turn me on, because I probably missed the agenda vote.
No, that's okay. They've got you in now and we're good. Thank you. So now we have approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. It's been moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Danko to approve the minutes of May the 3rd, 2022. Are there any concerns or? No? Thank you. Please vote accordingly. So Councillor Ferguson, we have you in. We're just waiting for your vote. Thank you. It is carried. Now we're on to delegation request. Peter DeLulio, we haven't seen you for a little while, respecting 940 and 946 Beach Boulevard. This is recommendation 2 in the item 7.3 for today's meeting, and it's to be heard before 7.3. Delegation speaking at a public meeting will be heard during that agenda item. So it has been moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Partridge, to approve the delegation. Please vote now. Thank you. Thank you. Consent items. So we're on to consent item 7.1. So this is the active official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and plan of subdivision applications, PED 22106 citywide. It is just to put it on the floor. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Danko, to put it on the floor. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Pearson first, and then Councillor Danko, please. Go ahead, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm just trying to find it. So this is the list of all the different applications, and I just wanted to clarify. I think it's Appendix B. I'm just trying to find it. I think it's Appendix B. There's no break, so there is one application in Ward 10, but it doesn't say Ward 10. So I think staff should just amend that listing, and I'm sure it's Appendix B. I'm trying to find it, but unfortunately the computer takes some time. I'm trying to find it, but it just takes time for it to pull up for me. That's my problem. Shoot, I can't find it at this time. I can send it to staff afterwards. And I want to thank staff and appreciate the addition of Appendix D, I think it is. Yeah, with the applications that are currently being appealed for non-decision to the OLT. It is good to at least have a running tally of where we sit on applications that have come before us at committee and council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions on Bill 109 and all the outstanding applications on this in this report that are past the statutory timeline for non-decision. Just a quick count, I get about 70 applications in total, and there's quite a few that are nearing the timeline as well. So through you to staff, are we at the point, or will we soon be at the point where we will be forced to basically just blanket deny all of those applications that are past the statutory time limit?
Okay, thank you. Who would like to take that? Oh, Anita is with us today. Oh, and I forgot, please, all staff, if you're being put on, would you please announce your name and your title, please? Thank you.
Good morning, Anita Fayback, Manager of Development Planning. Through the chair to the councillor, the applications that are currently with the city, Bill 109 would not apply to them. So that would go into effect starting January 1st, and it would impact any applications that would be received on January 1st or after.
Thank you. Subsequently to that, there's some applications on there, like some are 6.5 years old. I think some of the oldest ones. So they've been on there for a very long time. There hasn't been much action on them. I'm reminded of the incident with the Garner Road warehouse development, where the property was purchased, and then the new owner was able to aggressively use an existing application that had reached its subsequent appeal period, and brought it to the Ontario Land Tribunal for a rubber stamp. So are there applications on there where we're concerned that, the property might change hands, or they might be able to use the Ontario Land Tribunal to get approvals that, kind of a switch of use, or something different than what was originally applied for?
Through the chair to the councillor, I'm not aware of any properties on the list that are in the process of changing ownership. It's not to say that that could not happen. And as with the property at 140 Garner Road, a change in ownership would not suspend the application. It would still be active. So depending on the circumstances, and if they made a resubmission to the city prior to an appeal, that would sort of reactivate that file. It would go through a circulation process. And then if it were to be appealed, then excuse me, any changes to the application or to the proposal would be dealt with through the tribunal.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, just for the committee, I guess the concern is, and this was brought to the fore by the Garner Road application, is you have a property owner that we're working with in good faith towards a resolution. The property sold, and then the new property owner, has no intention of following through with the original application, and uses that statutory timeline to then appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal for something completely different, something completely new that they never applied to the City of Hamilton for. So I think that's something in the future, if this is going to be a tactic in the development industry, that we need to be aware of. But thank you, Madam Chair. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, just on the 140 Garner Road, I believe what the developer appealed there was the Conservation Authority application on the offsetting of the wetland. And I guess Steve is not here today, but by right, he can get approval from the city for that development. But they decided to tack on to the Conservation Authority appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal the subdivision agreement. So that may be a little different. Not sure. I don't know whether Nita knows that or not, but it wasn't necessary they used the requirement that Silvestri had applied. I'm not sure they used that as a reason to flip it to the Ontario Land Tribunal. I think it was an amendment to the application from the Conservation, or the appeal of the Conservation Authority. Just for the information, unless Nita knows something different. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I see that Steve Robichaud has turned on his camera. Is that because
he is
just to
here.
say good morning, or would you like to comment?
Good morning, Steve Robichaud,
I see
Director
him
of Planning
laughing.
and Chief Planner. Sorry, hopefully you can hear me. There was, in addition, there was a permit that was applied to for the Conservation Authority for the wetland relocation. In addition, there was a previous subdivision application submitted by Silvestri, which was subsequently, those lands were sold to Choice Properties, who were the ones who made the application for the wet permit to the Conservation Authority, and both the Conservation Authority permit, which was denied by the Conservation Authority, and then the subdivision application, which was appealed for non-decision, are going forward to an OLT hearing, and staff have been directed to attend that hearing to oppose both the wetland permit and the revisions to the subdivision at this point in time. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson, you still have the floor.
No, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. No other comments or questions. It's been moved and seconded. Please vote accordingly. Thank you. And it has passed. So now we're on to 7.2. This is the appeal of the zoning bylaw amendment application ZAC 18049 and draft plan of subdivision application 25T-202109 for lands located at 860 and 884 Barton Street, Stony Creek, PED 22114, Ward 10. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson to put it on the floor. Does the committee wish to see the staff presentation? And this is for information only. Councillor Pearson, this is your word. Go ahead.
So many buttons at the bottom of the computer this morning. Yeah, I don't know that I need the whole presentation, but if Tim can just give us a capsule view of what the issues are that are being appealed. And I believe it's the stormwater management bond. So I'm just asking if Tim, could you fast forward to that and just give us an overview? I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, good morning.
Morning. Just give me a second. I will get the presentation slides up, and as per councilor's request, I will just provide a brief summary. Confirming you can see these slides.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. So sorry, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tim Vroman, Senior Planner with the Development Planning Suburban Team, and I'm providing a brief overview of the appeal of the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision applications for the lands located at 860 and 840 Barton Street in Stony Creek. So just as a brief summary of the applications, it's an amendment for rezoning for residential development. It's for
Sorry, Tim, can you please put that on the full? There you go. Thank you. Go ahead.
oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Well, yeah, I'll just jump ahead. So it's an application for residential development, 251 units in the form of masonette townhouses, 2- and 3-story townhouse dwellings and stacked townhouse dwellings, neighborhood park, and a stormwater management facility. And then as the summary of the issues, they're primarily related to conformity with the Block 2 servicing strategy, stormwater management, grading concerns, location of the neighborhood park, and privacy concerns that were raised from residents. So if I can jump ahead to this image. So this is an overlay of the proposed development. So as you can see here, so we'll just do a comparison. So what they have is, this is the stormwater management block location. Has an existing dwelling located in the northwest corner that is proposed to be retained. The townhouse dwelling looks located here on a network of private condominium roads, a proposed public street, and the neighborhood park. So shown here is the approved Block 2 servicing strategy plan. And the proposed development has been overlaid on top of that. So there's a bit of line work here, but the issues that have been identified, so part of with stormwater management, keep in mind that the servicing strategy is conceptual, but it does identify a centralized stormwater management facility in this location. They've shown it in the general location, but there's certainly some concerns making sure that it's sized appropriately to capture the external drainage areas located further to the south of the subject lands, as well as ensuring that the connections to that are following proper municipal right-of-ways through that drainage. And so the black lines we can see here show the original road network that would have identified opportunities for public right-of-ways to connect to that storm pond. This proposal is, as I said, it's for network of private condominium roads with the townhouse dwellings. so it's proposing that there would be a public street that would be located here that would then modify the block sourcing strategy to continue it this way and come out onto Glover Road, as opposed to this network of cul-de-sac streets that are internal to this main collector road interior. And further revision is that street is shown where the neighborhood park is generally located. The intent is that the street would go there and the park would be then modified to, instead of more being on a north-south, taller than wider, it would be basically turned 90 degrees. That is the intent. And the public street would then be straightened out along here, just immediately north-south alignment directly to the west of the subject lands. So in relation to that, it's a very flat topography, grading the lands and integrating with adjacent developments. There's also for some significant retaining walls as well in order to properly grade and drain the site, which also raises some issues with integration with existing lands, compatibility, and ensuring that it doesn't cut off overland drainage flows. That's fairly high level summary of the issues. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Councillor Pearson, you still have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Tim, I really appreciate the quick overview because it just, you encapsulated basically everything that I want to be sure my colleagues were aware of as the issues here. And recognizing this is for an OLT application for non-decision. So at the appropriate time, Madam Chair, I think I did move it and appreciate the information on the table today. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have you down as moving this and seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Any other questions? Thanks, Tim. You can take down your presentation now, just so I can see the panel. Any other questions? No, seeing none. So can we go to the vote? Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
To receive the presentation and then to move to receive 7.2 because this is consent items. Thank you. And I think that was moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. For the second one, please, this is to receive 7.2 as consent items. Please vote accordingly. Thank you. And as I promised at the beginning of the agenda review, Peter DeLulio, you're on to discuss, I believe, 940 and 946 Beach Boulevard. This is recommendation 2 in the Heritage Planning Committee minutes. Good morning, Peter.
Morning, Councillor, and it's good to be back. I only submitted.
I really can't hear you very well, Peter. Sorry, I've aged since you've left, so I need to hear you a little clearer.
My apologies. Is that better, or?
I'll ask my colleagues. It's still rough for me, but I'll defer to. Can everybody hear Peter? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, Madam Chair. I only submitted a request for delegation just in case there were any questions of the proposal we had. We support the recommendation that went to the Heritage Committee, and we look forward to getting on with our project on Beach Boulevard.
Okay. Any questions for Peter so far? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Peter. Good to see you again. Don't see any Coca-Cola stuff in the background, though.
No, it's all at home.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Partridge, that we receive Peter DeLulio's approval. Presentation. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearson. Or a thumbs up then? Got it? Okay, thank you. So it's been moved. Thank you. Now we're on to 7.3. This is the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee Report 22-005. And it has been moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Danko. Are there any questions or concerns about the recommendations in place? And I see Councillor Ferguson waving frantically, but I don't know why this is up on the screen. I can't see the panel. I just saw the, thank you. Go ahead. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a pretty serious heritage question in my community. Is it okay to ask a question to staff about that at this time?
A serious one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it
Okay.
related to the committee report in front of us right now?
No, it's related to another building. Our demolition permit has been applied for and staff are ready to issue it. And I'm very concerned it's another Brandon house. I just want to get a reaction from staff on it.
I've got the clerk sort of saying that this is not related to the committee member. If it's a really quick, I'll allow it. Councillor
Okay, and you
Partridge?
can always stop me, Madam Chairman. I understand that it's not necessarily connected exactly, but there was a request for demolition permit that went out through the automatic process. I'm just trying to think of the software. Amanda went out through Amanda about a demolition permit for 256 Lime Kiln Road in Ancaster. And I always remember that as being the old Firestone home. It's a very, very large older home that sits on top of a hill, very similar to the one that we engaged on at the old Stockwood executives, former Stockwood executives at Filman and Mohawk. This sits at the end of the road up on top of a hill. I know there was an application for a few years ago to have some of the lots severed off that. Not sure what really happened to it. But now they want to demolish the home. And so I put alerts out to planning staff, Ken Coit and Alyssa Golden, copied Steve, and also to building department. And George, and he's probably at the meeting today, sent a response to me yesterday, say, Councillor, since the above property has no heritage designation, we are unable to hold back the issuance of a demolition permit once the application is compiled with all applicable law under Ontario building code. I get that, but this may be one that got missed. So I was hoping that we could send Elisa up there. Now, I know she's on vacation, but in the meantime, the building's going to go ahead and just issue the demolition permit and the thing will be knocked down in a day. And I'm very worried about that because it's just a Brandon House number 2 where there was no heritage protection on the building. We weren't notified. It just, boom, the backhoe shows up with a whole ram on it and down it comes. And I want to just be darn sure that we're not destroying a very significant heritage building that may have got missed during heritage review. And so I want to make sure that the demolition permit is held until heritage staff can take a look at it. And how do I do that? And maybe a question through to Steve, I would think.
Okay, so Councillor Ferguson, can I make a suggestion? Can you just give out the address right now? We're going to cover this under other business at the end of the meeting. That will give the staff some time to take a look at what you're talking about and that we're not putting them on the spot. So
Good
what
idea.
is the address, please?
256 Lime Kiln Road, Ancaster. I know Steve and Anita and Ken all have copies out, and I expect they're in the meeting today.
All right, so we're going to go back to this Heritage Committee meeting. In the meantime, staff will have something prepared to say under other business at the end of the meeting. That will give them some time. Okay, so now we're back to the Municipal Heritage Committee Report 22-005. It has been moved and seconded. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
There's a speakers list, Madam Chair, on this report.
I apologize. And there is. It's Councillor Wilson, Councillor Danko, then Councillor Partridge. No, it's the other way around. Sorry, I haven't been sitting in this chair for a little while, folks. Councillor Partridge, you're up first, then it's Councillor Danko, then Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make comment on the designation being going forward for the Copley building. I'm so pleased to see this. It's been a source of discussion on the Heritage Committee when I was there, I think 2 terms ago. And, you know, the committee wanting to, some on the committee wanting to really push the designation ahead. So I'm very pleased at this point to see it there. And I just wanted to make a comment on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And my apologies again. Councillor Danko. Now I know how to read the list here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a question for the Heritage Committee. There was a meeting, a discussion with Infrastructure Ontario about some additional heritage protections for Century Manor as part of the sale or pending sale through the province. And I thought that that was at their last meeting, but I didn't see it on the minutes here. So can I just get a reminder from staff when that official recommendations will come forward as they relate to Century Manor?
Okay, so again, Councillor Danko, just to be consistent, we've put the heads up now. I hope staff took note of that. We'll cover that under other business because
Okay.
it's not in front of us today. So we will do it under other business to get your answers.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I neglected to declare an interest at the outset, and I apologize to the chair and my colleagues. It is with respect to item 1 on this heritage report. So if you could separate it out for me kindly so that I might abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you state your conflict, please? Just for the public record.
Yes, no, sorry. My spouse's foundation has an interest in the property and its future.
Super. Thank you for that. So we're going to do item 1 first. We're going to have that separate vote, and then the remainder of the report is going to be moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Danko in both instances. So go ahead. This will be for item 1 only. Councillor Pearson. Must be just a slow day for some computers, eh? Councillor Pearson, thumbs up, because somehow your vote's not
Sorry,
getting to us.
It's
okay.
gone, but what happens is my computer keeps kicking eScribe out. Sorry.
As long as it's not kicking you out. All right. And then on the remainder of the committee meeting minutes, please. Moved and seconded by the exact same people. And if you're unable to vote, just thumbs up, please, or thumbs down. Yep, we're good. Thank you very much. Now we're on to public hearing delegations. So just to start us off, members of staff who are speaking at today's meeting are asked to state their name and title before speaking for the first time. We should put that probably on page 1. Public hearings, the written delegations. The public have been advised on how to pre-register to be a virtual delegate at the public meetings on today's agenda. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person and or public body does not make oral submission or at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the development applications before us today, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the person and or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. We're on to 9.1. This is the modifications and updates to existing secondary dwelling unit and secondary dwelling unit detached regulations, PED 20093C citywide. And I believe we have Shannon. Yep, we have Shannon and Alana that are on today. Oh, super. So can you please give us your presentation for this public hearing? And introduce yourself.
Good morning. This is Shannon Mackay, Manager of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. I'm just going to start the presentation here. You can see the presentation and hear me okay?
There. Thank you very much. Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry. So I'll be giving the presentation on behalf of Alana and myself. Thank you, Chair, members of committee, staff, and members of the public for joining us today. The zoning bylaw amendments before you today include further modifications and updates to the existing secondary plan or secondary dwelling units and secondary dwelling unit detached regulations. As you will recall, staff brought forward secondary dwelling unit and secondary dwelling unit detached regulations in May of 2021. As secondary dwelling units have evolved from laneway housing pilot project to the citywide secondary dwelling unit regulatory framework, staff have used all of the information available to craft, update, and revise regulations to accommodate this additional housing form. The zoning bylaws are meant to be live, living documents and with regular housekeeping amendments to help keep the documents up to date and relevant, and to continue to get housing through technical overhaul. In September of 2021, staff brought forward a housekeeping amendment that largely dealt with typographical errors and interpretation issues. Since that time, staff have been committed to monitoring building permits and minor variance applications and following up on implementation and interpretation issues to bring forward the necessary amendments. Between May 2021 and March of 2022, there have been approximately 267 building permit applications for secondary dwelling units and secondary dwelling units detached. These applications may have been for the creation of new internal or detached SDUs or for the legalization of an existing secondary dwelling unit. As of May 12, 2022, there have been 59 minor variance applications to permit secondary dwelling units. The minor variances are typically identified through the building permit application process to address on-site deficiencies. The majority of SDU building permit applications have proceeded without the need for minor variance applications. As a part of the continual monitoring of the bylaw, staff have identified areas where the regulations could be improved to provide clarity and ease of implementation for both members of the public and staff. The regulations have been reorganized to distinctly regulate internal SDUs and detached SDUs. The reorganization of the regulations also contemplates future amendments, allowing for additional units to be accommodated, which will be discussed further in today's Planning Committee meeting as a result of the MCR OPA. Using the minor variance applications, staff have looked at the efficacy of the regulations and determined areas that are commonly revised to allow for SDUs. Of the 59 minor variance applications that have proceeded, the variances that have been required range from recognizing existing conditions for the principal dwelling, parking reductions, parking size reductions, and the location of secondary dwelling units detached. The most frequent modification is for a reduction to the front yard landscaping, which is currently required to be 50% as part of the SDU regulations. Secondly is parking reductions for both the principal dwelling and the SDU or SDU detached. And thirdly is a combination of the existing conditions for the existing principal dwelling. It has been recommended through this report to repeal and replace the existing secondary dwelling unit and secondary dwelling unit detached regulations in the community bylaw for ease of administration. The regulations have been reorganized and simplified where possible, and where feasible, the parent bylaw is relied on more heavily for some of the fundamental regulations. For example, front yard landscaping requirements have been removed from the individual secondary dwelling unit and secondary dwelling unit detached regulations, and the general provisions of each of the community bylaws remains applicable. The amendments also address some sustainability measures by adding flexibility to parking regulations to ensure that permeable pavers are permitted as a form of surface material, and landscaping treatment is required to reduce the amount of impervious areas. Further, parking modifications represent another large majority of the variances being sought. Staff recognize that the existing built form often creates constraints for adding parking, and in some cases, the existing principal dwelling legally exists without on-site parking. It was not the intent that parking for SDU results in the removal of landscaped area or amenity area. As a result, secondary dwelling units are not required to provide additional parking on a lot where the required parking for a principal dwelling has been maintained. Each of the zoning bylaws have been amended to clarify that parking for an SDU is only required to be provided when associated with the development of a new principal dwelling, or if the required parking for the principal dwelling has not been provided in accordance with the bylaw. For zoning bylaw 05200, the terminology has been changed from secondary dwelling units to additional dwelling units in anticipation for further amendments to come to the terminology and to better reflect the intent of the regulations. I know this chart is a little bit hard to read, and it's mostly been included if there's questions later on, but this chart indicates the parking requirements per the zoning bylaw for each of the former municipal zoning bylaws. The proposed amendments do provide for more flexibility to accommodate parking if an owner or applicant would like to provide on-site parking for the SDU. Typically, front yard parking is prohibited. However, if parking does not reduce the front yard landscaping lower than what is required, parking for an SDU is now permitted in the front yard as a result of the modifications proposed today. The intent of these modifications is to maintain the original SDU regulations, but provide additional clarity. These diagrams demonstrate that the original regulations have remained largely intact. As summarized in Appendix H of the report, the majority of the regulations will continue. For example, the maximum gross floor area for an SDU detached remains at 75 square meters. Building separation is maintained at 7.5 meters. Unobstructed path from the front lot line to the SDU detached is maintained at 1 meter, and landscaped area requirements that are dedicated to the secondary dwelling units have been maintained at 12 square meters. Lastly, the rear yard setback for a secondary dwelling unit detached at 1.2 meters. For an SDU detached in a side yard, the built form requirements largely remain the same, including building setbacks from the principal dwelling and separation distances between the principal dwelling and the SDU detached. For the corner lots, some clarification was provided for the terminology of where driveways can be located and the amount of landscaping in a flankage yard. For internal SDU regulations, there have been minor changes, and mostly in as it relates to reorganizing the regulations to provide some clarity and to remove redundant regulations. While the proposed bylaws will repeal and replace the current regulations, it should be emphasized that the procedure allowed for the most simplest method to reorganize the secondary dwelling unit regulations and ensure consistency across the community bylaws. The proposed revisions will allow for easier use of the regulations and reduce the number of variances being sought for secondary dwelling unit implementation. That completes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is it all right if you can just take down your presentation, because we do have a list, including myself. So we have Councillors Danko, Councillor Pearson, and myself. Thank you, Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a couple questions on the Committee of Adjustment applications, and then some questions on the specific clauses in the bylaw. So I'll just start with the Committee of Adjustment application. So there's 59 applications to the C of A, and I think the report said that 50 of those were approved. Is there a geographic breakdown to where those applications were? Do we have an idea, where in the city these were?
Thank you, Alana or Steve.
Through the chair, I do have a breakdown by ward that I can pull up just in a minute. As of May 12th, there were 59 applications and 6 were denied. If you just give me a minute, I'll find the breakdown for the wards.
Okay. Good thing I'm not a radio announcer. I'd have to feel like.
Okay, sorry about that. So for Ward 1, there have been 5 minor variance applications. For Ward 2, there have been 8 minor variance applications. Ward 3 has been 11. Ward 4 have been 5. Ward 5 have been 4 applications. Ward 6 has been 8 applications. Ward 7 has had 9. Ward 8 has had 6. Ward 9 has had 1. Ward 13 has had 1. And Ward 15 has had 1.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor.
Yeah, so I guess the trend there is that the vast majority of these are pretty much all in the older city of Hamilton. And then secondary to that, how many of those were for detached secondary dwelling units versus secondary dwelling units in the principal residence? Do you have a breakdown of that as well? Just
Alana?
We have through the chair, we have the information. I just don't have it synthesized at the moment. If we could maybe come back to that, we can work on that in the background.
okay, no problem. So if I could just dig into some of the variance applications that I've noticed that have come through the Ward 8 office to the Committee of Adjustment, and it was covered in the report, a lot of them. So things like the driveway locations, front yard landscape area reductions, parking reductions, reduced setbacks for the space between the principal dwelling unit and a detached secondary dwelling unit, the unobstructed path, side yard landscaping, things like that. And I've noticed that the City Hamilton planning staff have been recommending that in particular detached secondary dwelling units be approved even when they don't meet one or a number of those requirements that are already set out in the bylaw. So I guess my question through you is, if we're going to have requirements in the bylaw, but planning staff are going to consistently recommend that they be approved anyway, even if they don't meet the requirements, then are the requirements that we have, not effective, or do we need to change those requirements to make them more robust?
Through the chair,
Alana,
with
do you want to answer this, or?
Sorry. Through the chair. No, that's okay. The regulations that have been established in the bylaw, don't acknowledge the best or the worst case scenario. It is, the average case. We don't plan for either the best or the worst. So when we see minor variance applications come through to vary some of those regulations, it is planning staff's obligation to review the modifications in the specific context and determine if it's appropriate given the intent of those regulations. So, the regulations shouldn't necessarily be made more stringent, but the intent of the regulations and through these modifications have become more clear and understandable, so that when they are assessing the minor variance applications, they can do so while keeping the intent of the bylaw.
Okay.
Councillor?
So I guess the concern in the neighborhoods where I've been seeing applications to the Committee of Adjustment are primarily single-family home neighborhoods where there's out-of-town absentee landlords, investor property owners that are applying for detached secondary dwelling units. And they're applying consistently for all kinds of variance reductions in order to fit a detached secondary dwelling unit that is too big and doesn't really fit in that neighborhood into a lot, into a property where it really is too small. And that requires a long list of variances in order to fit that in. So when I look at, you know, some of the recommendations here, like the parking. So did I hear that right? That there's not going to be a requirement for parking for secondary dwelling units or detached secondary dwelling units, and that's a change from the existing.
Alana?
Yeah, Alana Fulford, senior planner with zoning bylaw reform. The proposed regulations do have a 0 parking requirement if for an SDU or SDU detached, if the existing dwelling, the required parking for that existing dwelling is in place and will be maintained going forward.
So
and that is
that's current. So if you have a primary dwelling, a secondary dwelling unit in the basement, and now a detached secondary dwelling unit, that's 3 separate living spaces, they're only required to provide parking for the primary residence. So two parking spaces would be typical for a single family neighborhood.
through the chair, that is correct.
So that is an ongoing issue. And then there's the issue of setbacks. So there's the side yard setbacks, 1.2 meters. I saw that there is a reduction for eaves and gutters. Is that consistent with the bylaw for new construction, or are eaves and gutters given an exemption?
Through the chair, that is consistent with the existing regulations in the various bylaws.
Okay. There's a requirement for a landscape buffer between the detached secondary dwelling unit and the property line, but it's limited to sod or ground cover or permeable pavers. So is the intention there to not have, like cedars or an actual physical landscape buffer? It's just a ground cover?
Through the chair,
Alana
it is.
Shannon?
Yes, I can answer that. Through the chair, it is intended that it be maintained with those features in mind only, so that it can, appropriately act as a drainage area and function as such.
I think a lot of neighbors would want to have, a hedge or a line of bushes or something like that between the secondary dwelling unit and the adjacent property. So I'm not sure why we would limit that. The issue of the max gross floor area. So I understand that's limited to 75 square meters. That's about 800 square feet. It's also limited to the size. It can't be bigger than the principal dwelling unit. Am I right there? So again, one of the problems, just seeing you nods, I'll take that as a affirmative.
Sorry.
So one of the problems is a number of the houses in some of the neighborhoods where they're applying for these secondary dwelling units, the detached secondary dwelling units, is they're the same size as the principal dwelling, because the principal dwellings are relatively small, modest. They're around 800 square foot footprint. And then you end up with a detached secondary dwelling unit that is basically the same size as the house that's already there, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'd really like to see a requirement that the secondary dwelling unit be a percentage of the principal dwelling, that they can't be bigger than, say, 75% than the principal dwelling. Because if you're in a neighborhood where you have small, modest principal dwellings, and then you're building secondary dwelling units, detached secondary dwelling units that are an entire other house on the same property, it really defeats the purpose of it being secondary. You're building 2 primary houses on one property, essentially.
So Councillor Danko, only because the first question took some time, we've been giving you a little bit of leeway here. So do you want to just make this your last question and then go back on the list, please?
You could put me on the list for a second time because
Okay.
there's a couple other specific provisions that I'd like to dig into, and perhaps some amendments. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. And I'll come back to you, Councillor Pearson, then myself. Go ahead, Councillor
Thank you,
Pearson.
Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Shannon, thank you for the information. I just want to add a correction, though, because you didn't mention any applications to Committee of Adjustments for Ward 10. And I believe there was one that was tabled and then did come back. And, you know, and it was approved. It was the construction, the intent of the owner was the construction of a very large garage. I believe there's also a basement under it. And then when the SDUs came into force, that garage application came forward to turn it into a secondary dwelling unit. And it was approved. So yes, there are concerns of size. I think the owner did get around that somehow. I can't pull the paperwork up now with regards to it, but there was one. So you should note that there was one for sure in Ward 10 as well. But I did want to ask with regards to parking, and just please clarify, you mentioned, Shannon, that parking will be allowed on the front lawn. So I know, and I'm just reading an email on a townhouse issue where a homeowner's parking on the front lawn and the townhouse, right? The board is concerned. So this is totally separate as far as parking, but so if we're going to allow parking on the front lawns for SDUs, what happens when a resident comes forward and says, well, I want to park on my front lawn now, and they're just a single family residential unit? How are we going to address that? Because they're going to say, but you allow it there, why aren't you allowing it here? And I know only certain areas of the city do allow or don't allow parking on the front lawns. So
through the chair, it would still be a minor variance application to allow for a principal dwelling to allow parking on a front yard. This is a specific requirement or permission through the SDU regulations. So it would still require a minor variance application where those restrictions exist in the former community bylaws.
okay, that clarifies that for me. I appreciate that. So I'm just going to go through on page. Sorry if your report, it's not numbered, but it's a page with regards to parking and it's got all the changes. So I just want to confirm, I'm looking at Stony Creek because I'll use that one. We're saying that as an SDU, the 2 columns, you'll need 1 additional parking spot for that SDU, correct? And 2 for the principal residence.
Anna or Shannon?
Sorry, Councillor, can you just confirm what your
I'm looking at the PED 20093C, page C. It's your parking. It's that chart that you said it's a little bit complicated.
Oh, sorry, as part of the presentation.
Of your presentation, sorry, yes, yeah, sorry.
Here. Okay, so maybe I'll defer to Alana.
Okay, through the chair. So you're asking, I'm sorry, the scenario being.
I just want to confirm I'm just using Stony
Yep.
Creek because that's what, you know, my main interest. So currently a Stony Creek residence requires 2 parking spaces on a principal residence. And we're saying for an SDU and a DSDU, there will be 1 additional required. Correct?
If this is a dwelling that has been built after May 12th, 2021, then a parking space will be required for each of an SDU and a detached SDU.
Okay. Alrighty. I just want that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I believe, is it Councillor Danko that's the vice chair? Sir. Councillor Ferguson, could you please take the chair for me?
I got it. Go ahead.
Thank you. So through you to Shannon or Alana, if I'm reading this properly, we're now going to allow in the rule settings a secondary detached dwelling. In other words, a farm help home.
Through the chair, these provisions and the existing SDU and SDU detached regulations still only apply in the urban area. Sorry, I should clarify. The SDU detached only applies in the urban area. There would be another report coming forward to deal with the rural area as it relates to secondary dwelling units detached. Those, it's not currently permitted in the bylaws.
Okay, thank you. I got that screwed up. It's my, that's my problem, sorry. Okay, that was my question. Thank you, because I had a whole list of questions if it was a yes. So thank you very much. And I'm going to come back to Councillor Danko as promised. Your second speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I guess just specifically a couple things that I have concerns about. One is the allowance for front yard secondary dwelling unit parking, because on one hand, we're saying that no additional parking is required for secondary dwelling units, but we can accommodate the parking on the front lawn. So essentially, that's parking for the primary dwelling unit that's going to be permitted on front lawns. So I'm not in favor of that. And then as well, specifically some of the offset requirements for detached secondary dwelling units, the rear yard 7.5 meters, interior side yard 4 meters, front from the front facade 5 meters. I don't have a problem with what's already in the bylaw, but my issue is that those offsets are not being upheld by our City of Hamilton planning staff when they make their recommendations to the Committee of Adjustment. So I would like to see those increased so that when an application does go to the Committee of Adjustment, you know, a minor variance would be a couple meters, which would bring it in line with what we have right now. And then third was just the size of the detached secondary dwelling unit, the 75 meters. That makes perfect sense when it is, you know, when you have a 2,000 square foot single family home, but when the home is itself, you know, roughly 75 square meters, I think there really needs to be a percentage requirement that it can't be larger than, say, 75% or 60% of the primary dwelling unit. So I don't really want to put those amendments on the floor right now. I'd like to take that back and have some additional discussion with planning staff. So my preference today would perhaps just to defer this to a future meeting, you know, in 2 weeks' time. Give me the opportunity to have some further discussions with planning staff, and then and come back with that if committee's amenable to that.
Thank you. And just for process purposes only, Councillor Danko, my understanding, because this is a public hearing, we would have to close off the public hearing portion of this. And if there's going to be some major changes to this, then that concerns me as far as closing off the public hearing. So we can leave it open. So you may want to consider that if you're asking for deferrals, to leave the public meeting open.
Yeah, that'd be fine with me. I don't think there's only some written submissions today on this. So I think that would be fair to leave the public meeting open.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go to the rest of my colleagues. I'm willing to second that deferral for at least 2 weeks, just to get some clarity on some of this. And to me, it's not minor. You're correct. It's a little bit more than minor. Are there any concerns or questions about the deferral? Yes, Councillor Partridge.
Yeah, my only question, and I'm not really concerned, but my only question to staff, is there anything time sensitive about this particular report and the approval? Thank you.
So staff, is there anything in the hopper that needs to be addressed now rather than can it wait a month, 2 weeks to a month?
Through the chair, no, I think we can take the opportunity to meet with Councillor Danko as requested and come back in a timely manner with any revisions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Partridge,
thank you, Madam Chair. Yep, and thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate that, and I appreciate staff's work on this. Just to clarify further, does that mean that it would come back to the next planning meeting? Does that give staff and Councillor Danko enough time? Should we be specific?
Yeah, I would assume so. So, Elsie, Kelsey, can we defer this to the next planning committee meeting? Is that going to be screwing up any of the agendas that we have on in the docket now?
It doesn't affect me in any way. It would just be up to staff as whether they can come back for the May 31st meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to Alana and Shannon. Are you okay for 2 weeks or would you prefer 4 weeks? So 2 planning meetings from now. What would be your preference?
Through the chair, I'd just be concerned if there is any issue with the notice that was given in terms of any changes that might be proposed to come through. I see Steve came on, so he might have some other.
So we got Steve on. Steve, what is your preference?
To the chairman, my preference would be 2 weeks to the May 31st meeting, simply because the June meeting could be a rather large agenda. As you know, with the election, we are running out of runway to deal with a lot of matters. So the June agenda, could be a full meeting. And pursuant to Section 3417, I think, of the Planning Act, the council can just pass a resolution if they desire to amend the draft bylaws after the statutory public meeting. So there is a process in the Planning Act that allows for council to make amendments to the staff recommendation, and they would just have to be built into that recommendation. As it relates to, I think one of the points of clarification is Councillor Danko's question was the front yard landscaping provision is not a citywide provision. It's actually very specific to the former City of Hamilton zoning bylaw 6593. The previous the current enforced SDU regulations introduced a front yard landscaping regulation into other municipal zoning bylaws, and that was causing hardship for homeowners because they did not, with a single detached dwelling, have the 50% front yard landscaping. So when they came to add an accessory dwelling unit, they were having to go to the Committee of Adjustment to recognize their existing driveway. What's proposed here is that so we wanted to relax that regulation in the outlying zoning bylaws and address it on a comprehensive basis when we bring forward the new residential zoning. But that regulation in 6593 would still apply. So a homeowner in Hamilton, in the former City of Hamilton, that's zone C or D, that was looking to add in a single detached dwelling that is zone C or D, if they were proposing to add an accessory dwelling unit, they are still required to meet that 50% front yard landscaping if the dwelling is required, whether it's as a single detached dwelling, a converted single detached dwelling, or to add a detached SDU on the property. And then as it relates to the size of the accessory dwelling, I would point out that there is a cap of 25% gross, or the detached secondary dwellings can only occupy 25% of the lot. The zoning regulations allow for a single detached dwelling to occupy 44% of the lot. So even if they build a 2-story detached, single detached dwelling, you'd have 50% GFA, whereas the principal dwelling can have up to 88% GFA based on the lot. When you look at the yard regulations, I think the situation we have is where you have rather modest homes in some of the areas of the zoning of the city that may be 1,000 square feet or less, and people are coming in, they are building a detached SDU with a garage, and that seems to be equal to it. So, but by definition, it should be accessory. So we could just simply add a regulation that would to say that the GFA of the S, notwithstanding the 75 square meters, it still has to be less than that of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling to respond to that issue. And that would be the simplest way to respond to that. As it relates to the Committee of Adjustment, I think if a council were to adopt this new bylaw, then it would provide much more clarity since we've harmonized and clarified the regulations. And I think you'd see that staff being more stringent in the application of assessing those tests, because with this update, it would be very clear what council's intent would be going on a go-forward basis, that this is the new set of regulations. We worked with the old ones for 6 months. We did expect that there would be a surge of applications where people were waiting in the wings until the new regulations came forward, or there would be those outliers that would not meet the bylaw. And we were hoping now with this sort of update, based on the work that Shannon and her team have done, we've reached that situation where it should address the vast majority of the situations. There will always be outliers on either end. Either units are too small or too big and they can't meet the bylaw regulations. But going forward, once this new bylaw update gets adopted, I think the direction will be to staff to be a little bit more to be less flexible, I would say, in assessing some of the minor variances, because we knew that there would be a bit of a transition period where people would be coming in to legalize units, because that was always one of our goals, right? To make sure that the units that were illegal were brought up to code and address the issues. But I think because the way the new bylaw is being structured, it does provide a lot more clarity. However, if committee would rather wait until, we can work with the ward councillor and report back on May 31st with any proposed amendments to the bylaw in response to the issues or concerns that we hear today, if that's the will of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Danko, you still have the floor.
No, excuse me, I have the floor.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Partridge.
No, that's okay, Madam Chair. That's okay.
There's no list in front of me.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's not easy. I really appreciate that that explanation, and I guess that the bottom line is that if we do it for the 2 weeks, keep the public session open. If there's any major changes, though, I do want residents to have the opportunity to be able to see if those changes. So if I understood what I heard correctly about changing the bylaw after the fact, I just would have some questions about that. But I'm okay with deferring this for 2 weeks, provided we really need that clarity for staff to be able to, and committee of adjustment too, or they're going to pile up. So thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Danko for his deferral motion, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would still ask for a deferral for 2 weeks. That works for me. And I really appreciate the comments from Director Robichaud. The issue is not so much what is actually in the bylaw. I do support secondary dwelling units. I support detached secondary dwelling units 100%. The issue is how those are actually being interpreted and applied and consistency. So I think, just a couple of those points that were raised, I'd really appreciate some further discussion on that and make sure that we're all on the same page when there are applications that come forward and inevitably end up at the Committee of Adjustment. So I think that a couple of weeks will give us some time to iron out a couple of those wrinkles.
Okay, thank you very much. It has been moved and seconded. I don't see anybody on a list. I don't see anybody waving. So please vote accordingly for the deferral for 2 weeks and to keep the public meeting open. So that's to May 30th. 31. Councillor Danko, Partridge. Thumbs up. Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. It is carried. Now we're on to 9.2. This is the Municipal Comprehensive Review, Official Plan Review, Phase 1 amendments to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan and the Rural Hamilton Official Plan, PED 21067B, citywide. Delia McPhail and Alana, you're back on, Alana. So can we see the presentation, please? We have a lot of delegates coming forward, or 6 of them, so we might as well get a full understanding for everyone.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? My name is Delia McPhail. I'm a planner within the Sustainable Communities section of the Planning Division, and I will be providing the presentation today. Good morning, Chair, members of Planning Committee, staff, and members of the public. My name is Delia McPhail, and I'm a planner within the Sustainable Communities section of the Planning Division. I would like to provide you with a summary of the draft amendments to the Urban and Rural Hamilton Official Plans, which include amendments to ensure conformity with provincial land use planning policies, and those necessary to facilitate and support residential intensification within the urban area as part of the Municipal Comprehensive Review of the city's official plans. To begin, let's answer the question, why are we updating our official plans? As part of good planning practice and legislative requirements, municipalities must review their official plans on a regular basis to ensure they remain up to date, reflect current provincial policy, and represent the long-term vision of the municipality. This process is called the Municipal Comprehensive Review, or MCR for short. Official plan amendments that implement the MCR require the approval of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. In November 2021, through Grids 2 and the MCR, Council approved a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario to accommodate all forecasted population and employment growth within the existing urban area to the year 2051. The draft official plan amendments implement the no urban boundary expansion growth scenario by removing current policies and mapping that would allow for a future urban boundary expansion and to plan for and manage growth within the existing urban area, including changes to the residential policies of the urban Hamilton official plan to help facilitate intensification. To fully appreciate the official plan amendments before you today, we must go back to 2016 when the province released draft updates to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe and the Greenbelt Plan as part of its coordinated review. In 2017, the city initiated its update to the growth-related integrated development study, known as Grids 2, and the groundwork was set for the necessary studies and reports to inform how and where the city should grow. Significant work has been undertaken by staff and consultants over the past 5 years to align with multiple provincial policy and methodology updates. Staff who have contributed to the Grids 2 MCR process represent multiple divisions, including economic development, transportation planning, transit planning, public works, growth management, housing, tourism and culture, recreation, and public health, to name a few. Key components and milestones of the Grids 2 project include the residential intensification update, employment land review, land needs assessment, and the evaluation of growth options, all of which have informed this first phase of the municipal comprehensive review. Now let me apprise you of what has taken place over the past few months. In January, staff presented the draft amendments to Council and requested authorization to commence public consultation on the amendments. Following the January 19th Council meeting, staff provided Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing staff with copies of the draft official plan amendments and supporting documentation for the Minister's review. During the months of February and March, staff conducted early engagement and hosted targeted meetings with stakeholders, Indigenous community members, and others to allow for additional community input prior to finalizing the official plan amendments. On the project webpage, staff uploaded track changes versions of the official plans with the proposed updates incorporated so that the proposed changes could be shown within the context of the existing official plan policies. Since the province's 90-day review period has passed, we were able to conduct the statutory open house on May 3rd, which was held virtually. An addendum to the public consultation summary document is attached as Appendix 6 to the staff report and summarizes the process and results of the statutory open house held on May 3rd. Today is a statutory public meeting. Following Council adoption of the official plan amendments, we will send the OPAs and supporting documentation to the province for approval. Staff have undertaken a comprehensive consultation strategy leading up to and including this phase of the Municipal Comprehensive Review. Activities were advertised in local newspapers, electronic billboards, the city's website, and social media outlets. This slide depicts the amount of public engagement the Grids 2 and MCR project has garnered since 2017. Staff have hosted 14 open houses, 5 virtual open houses, 4 stakeholder workshops, and 8 discussions with Indigenous communities, which included the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, 6 Nations of the Grand River, the Haudenosaunee Development Institute, and the Hamilton Regional Indian Center. In total, over 500 attendees participated in discussions. From the general public, we've received over 550 written comments, more than 250 completed online surveys, over 5,000 visits to the project website, and more than 18,000 mail-out survey responses. This is a considerable amount of public engagement that is unprecedented for planning projects, particularly as much as it has been taken place during COVID. Having said that, this has been a significant undertaking transcending multiple divisions across the city. It will feed into the work of others and will ultimately impact every citizen. Through the recent round of public consultation, we received the following feedback from those who had participated. There is a need to remove barriers for the creation of additional housing units with a mix of unit sizes. There's general public support of mixed use, safe, walkable neighborhoods. Higher density development is supported in proximity to a transit network and an active transportation network. There is also support for climate change resiliency, including the use of green infrastructure, increased tree cover, and protection of green spaces. Finally, there was support for the commitment to meaningful engagement with First Nations. This feedback indicated that there were no significant concerns with the proposed updates. Staff made appropriate changes to address comments as well as a few refinements, but overall, the public is supportive of the updates. The next few slides present highlights of the proposed official plan amendments. These amendments are enhancing existing official plan policies by providing direction and guidance to plan for the city's growth to the year 2051 in a manner that is sustainable, innovative, and will enhance the quality of life for citizens to live, work, and play. To begin, let's speak to promoting intensification, redevelopment, and compact built form throughout the existing urban area. The proposed updates include increased density targets for the downtown urban growth center from 250 to 500 residents and jobs per hectare. For designated greenfield areas, the density target increases from 50 to 60 residents and jobs per hectare, except for areas not subject to existing approvals, which will be planned to achieve a minimum of 70 residents and jobs per hectare. Major transit station areas and employment areas now have density targets assigned to these areas. Major transit station areas will have a minimum of 160 residents and jobs per hectare, and employment areas will have an overall minimum of 29 jobs per hectare and specific targets by designation. Residential intensification targets have also increased to require 80% of population growth to occur within the built-up area, of which 30% will be accommodated within the downtown urban growth center, 40% within the urban nodes and corridors, and 30% within neighborhoods identified on Schedule E urban structure. There is also increased flexibility for future residents by future residential development by permitting a broader range of uses in low-density residential areas, including up to 6 dwelling units on a property without the need for an official plan amendment. Together, the changes proposed through the draft Urban Hamilton Official Plan Amendment provide a policy framework that promotes intensification, redevelopment, and compact form throughout the urban area in accordance with appropriate development standards. For medium and high-density residential areas, increased building heights are permitted, provided a mix of unit sizes and sustainable building and development techniques are incorporated, and that the public views and vistas of the Niagara Escarpment are protected. Policy enhancements included in the draft official plan amendments also promote an efficient transportation system with a complete streets approach. Active transportation, which includes walking, cycling, and the use of mobility-assisted devices, are prioritized as an integral component of the transportation network. Planning and promoting pedestrian-friendly streets that provide opportunities for emerging transportation modes and technology are encouraged to increase social interaction and community connectivity. And finally, under this highlight, new and enhanced policies prioritize public transit investments as a component of infrastructure planning to provide a transit service that is planned and managed for the safety of all system users. The City of Hamilton has declared a climate emergency, and this is explicitly recognized in the policy updates. The draft OPA includes an enhanced policy framework to prepare for and reduce the impacts of a changing climate, including new policies related to assessing infrastructure risks, vulnerabilities, and impacts of extreme weather, preserving and/or enhancing natural features in subdivision design, the incorporation of low-impact development techniques, policies regarding energy conservation of municipally owned facilities in reference to future sustainable building and development guidelines for private development proposals are also included. These policy updates, together with the forthcoming Community Energy and Emissions Plan and Climate Change Adaptation Plan, will assist the city in meeting its goal of net zero by 2050. The draft OPA includes new policies that affirm the city and Indigenous communities have a shared interest in land use planning matters and stewardship, so greater emphasis has been added with respect to engagement with Indigenous communities. There is also the acknowledgement of the spiritual aspect of cultural heritage landscapes through a new policy specifying that an Indigenous community may identify the significance of a heritage resource. The draft OPA also recognizes Indigenous communities as key partners for the development of climate change policies and plans. It also respects existing consultation protocols of Indigenous communities, as well as the need to develop a mutually agreed upon engagement protocol for land use planning matters. Other important updates include implementing approved employment land conversions, new policies requiring annual reporting on the city's land supply, and mapping updates to implement changes to the Greenbelt Plan and Niagara Escarpment Plan. So in terms of next steps, following council adoption of the official plan amendments, staff will send the official plan amendments and supporting documentation to the province for approval. The zoning bylaw amendments to implement the Urban Hamilton official plan amendment will be brought forward to Planning Committee following approval of the official plan amendment. More details on the proposed zoning bylaw amendments are provided in the next slides. The proposed changes to the low-density residential zones within the former community zoning bylaws will provide flexibility for residents by improving housing choices and will provide opportunities for small-scale intensification by allowing a broader range of housing types in neighborhoods across the city. These changes will be the first step to implementing the amendments proposed to the Urban Hamilton official plan that expand housing choices and opportunities for small-scale intensification within neighborhoods across the city, thereby helping to respond to the housing needs of residents of the city, as the city, like many others, face a housing crisis. Currently, there are over 40 individual low-density residential zones within the zoning bylaws for the former communities, and many of these zones only permit single detached dwellings. Providing housing options means expanding the range of housing types permitted in low-density residential areas to include semi-detached, duplex dwellings, and street townhouse dwellings, as well as the conversion of existing dwellings to permit up to 4 dwelling units within the existing dwelling. These changes proposed are the first step to zoning bylaw changes in the City of Hamilton that reflect the forward-looking policies of the UHOP and that respond to the needs of the residents. These changes will also inform the ongoing work program for the residential zoning project, which will culminate in the introduction of new low-density residential zones in zoning bylaw number 05200. These new zones will replace the existing low-density residential zones of the former community zoning bylaws with zones that reflect modern practices and standards of good planning and that have flexibility to respond to the needs of residents. As previously noted, the proposed amendments to the low-density residential zones will be brought forward to a future Planning Committee meeting following the adoption of the MCR official plan amendment. In terms of next steps, staff note that the amendments before you today represent the conclusion of the first phase of the city's official plan review. There are 3 more phases, including the next phase of the municipal comprehensive review to bring the rural Hamilton official plan into conformity with the provincial policy statement, the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and the Greenbelt Plan. Finally, this slide references some of the ongoing projects by staff across city divisions that relate to and will further implement the official plan updates that are included in the MCR official plan amendments, providing direction and guidance to plan for a sustainable and innovative city that will enhance the quality of life for citizens to live, work, and play. This concludes my formal presentation. At this time, my colleagues and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Delia. Can you take your presentation down, please? I have on the list right now is Councillor Pearson and then myself. Go ahead, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Delia, thank you so much for that very, very comprehensive report. But there are a couple of little things that just red flags that went up that I really want some clarification to. And as you were speaking, I was trying to find it. I actually printed the report out as you were talking about it. Just clarify on a single family or a single piece of property now, this proposal is recommending up to 6 units. And second question then, because you went on further and said, And if it's an existing building, the potential of 4 internal units in that building. Could you please just clarify?
Thank you,
Yes,
Delia.
yes, through the chair. The official plan amendment before you allows up to 6 dwelling units on a single property without the need for an official plan amendment. The zoning bylaw changes that are associated with this official plan amendment is an interim step that would allow the conversion of an existing dwelling to contain up to 4 dwelling units. For
Without an official plan amendment, but they'd still have to go through a rezoning?
I will let, no, they will not. They will not need to go through a rezoning with this initial step to go up to 4 dwelling units on a single property. As mentioned in my presentation, the next step of the zoning bylaw changes will prepare changes that will speak to zoning for up to possibly other units, but I will let Shannon Mackay, manager of zoning, to speak to that.
Thank you.
Shannon?
Through the chair, Alana Fulford, I can actually speak to that. So yes, these interim measures that we're speaking to here would permit single detached, semi-detached, and duplex dwellings as of right in low-density residential zones, and would permit conversions of existing dwellings to contain 3 or 4 dwelling units as well. And those would be only through the conversion of existing dwellings. So that is what is proposed to be implemented following these changes, a change in policies to the official plans.
But okay, so single, semi, and duplex on any piece of land in the city. 3 to 4 dwelling units would be allowed in an existing. So my home, I could convert to potentially 4 units right now as a single family residential unit, or when this passes, without an OPA or a zoning bylaw amendment. Is that what you're telling me?
Through the chair, just to take a step back. So the proposed changes in use apply to all of the existing low-density residential zones in the former community bylaws. So what is being proposed would apply to all of those zones, and yes, would include those uses that you just reviewed. So single, semi, duplex, and conversions to 3 or 4 units.
In the existing, without
that is correct, and that would be permitted in the zoning bylaw. Now, just to clarify that for street townhouses, the conversion would only apply or allow for 1 additional dwelling unit within that street townhouse.
So when you say street, you mean like a townhouse?
A street townhouse.
Okay,
so,
street townhouse, okay. So
Counselor?
only 1 additional unit in that. So, okay, so how do you address that if it's a townhouse and they only have so many parking spots that have been provided originally in the townhouse dwelling, and now you may have 30 townhouses, say even 3 or 4 of them convert to create 4 more units, and there is no parking provided.
Through the chair, just to clarify that, basically with respect to a street townhouse, it will defer to the secondary dwelling unit regulations that are in place. And so basically that's what applies. If it's a conversion to 1 additional dwelling unit, then basically if it's a single, semi, or street townhouse, what applies is the regulations for secondary dwelling units.
Okay, and I'm sorry to belabor it, but it is a bit confusing, and I think all of us around this table understand what the impacts are going to be in our neighborhoods. So just going back to the proposals is that any you know, low density property throughout the whole city could potentially intensify to create 6 dwelling units on that property without applying for an official plan amendment or a comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment. Is that correct?
Through the chair. So the distinction is that up to 6 dwelling units is proposed through the OPA, and so they would not require for that 5th or 6th dwelling unit. That would not require an OPA, so up to 6 units. However, the proposed regulations for the zoning bylaw is to permit up to 4 units without requiring a zoning bylaw amendment. And just to clarify again, that the 3rd or 4th, 3 or 4 dwelling units is through conversion only.
Councillor Pearson, that's your time. Would you like to go on for a second?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Super. I do have Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Wilson, and then I'll go on. So Councillor Ferguson, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. This is fine. I'm very concerned about the last one. You know, if so anybody who lives in a single family home in a residential subdivision can, without any approvals whatsoever, other than maybe a building permit, can put up to 4 units in it. Or is it 6? I'm not clear on that yet either. But most of the homes in my area have two cars per home, and so that's 8 or 12, depending what the answer to the question is, cars that would need to be parked somewhere. And I just see that as being a real problem, particularly when they don't have to go through a public process. So first of all, my question is, Madam Chair, have I got that right? That someone can go into a community in my ward and convert a single family home over to, is it 4 or 6 units? Let's just get an answer to that question first.
Thank you. 4 or 6 units, please.
Through the chair, the proposed zoning bylaw amendments would permit up to 4.
Up to 4.
Dwelling
Councillor
units.
Ferguson.
Okay, I see that neighbors will be outraged by this, particularly if they have 2 cars per unit. That's 8 cars they got to park on a driveway that might hold 2 at best. And so now they're going to be parking in front of other people's homes up and down the street, which will create all kinds of problems. So first of all, I can't support that. And secondly, on slide number 9, it shows that intensification redevelopment compact built from the existing urban area. So a minimum of 80% through built up areas and intensification units distributed to downtown urban growth center and urban nodes and corridors. So Ancaster would be considered an urban node and corridor, the Wilson Street. Is that correct?
Thank you. Who would like to answer that, please?
Through the chair, this is Heather Travis, Senior Project Manager in the Sustainable Communities section. Yes, Ancaster is considered a node within the Urban Hamilton Official Plan, so would be identified as taking a portion or of accommodating a portion of the intensification growth over the next 30 years.
Thank you, Councillor.
And that's up, see, urban nodes, what's the 40% mean? 40% of new growth has to be in that area?
Through the chair, through the chair, yes. So 40% of the city's planned intensification over the next 30 years will be spread amongst the city's urban nodes and corridors. So that's certainly not just Ancaster, that's all of our nodes, which include sub-regional nodes like Eastgate and Lime Ridge Mall, as well as the community nodes such as Dundas, Ancaster, Waterdown, Stony Creek, et cetera, and also the corridors. So the B line corridor, A line corridor, and other corridors identified in the Urban Hamilton Official Plan.
Thank you.
Okay, but if I go to slide 17 next, it highlights proposed changes. There's a low density residential zones in Ancaster, Dundas, Flambrook, Lambrook, and Hamilton. And Stony Creek zoning laws total over 40 individual zones. Many of these zones only permit single detached dwellings. And I understand that that's not going to be implemented in this particular amendment. That's coming at a future date. Have I got that right?
Heather or Lana or
Through,
Shannon? Delia, sorry.
Through the chair, yes, this is Heather Travis again. That's correct. The zoning bylaw amendments are not being implemented through this public meeting. We are bringing them forward to provide insight onto how some of the official plan changes that we're proposing will be implemented in the future. The official plan amendment is proposing to increase the permissions in our low density residential areas to allow a wider range of options, including up to 6 units as of right. But the reason that the zoning bylaw would not be permitting up to 6 units through these the currently proposed changes to the low density zones is that there are items that we would want to review to allow up to 6 units to ensure that that would be compatible with surrounding areas, and that a lot that was going to contain 6 units in a low density area was situated in the appropriate location and was compatible with surrounding uses. So the official plan will allow that wider range of uses, but the zoning bylaw will restrict to 4 units through conversion at present to ensure that compatibility issues with an increased number of units could be accommodated. And again, we're planning for this increased range of housing options in our neighborhoods to facilitate the city in meeting the intensification targets that we're planning for to accommodate 80% of our population growth over the next 30 years within our existing built up area. So this is one step toward implementing that high intensification rate. Thank you.
Councillor?
Okay, yeah. I'm just trying to think as she's talking. This worries the daylights out of me. You know, adding 4 units, and of course, Wilson Street is a node, as just confirmed, and it's under attack by the development industry now, trying to go from 2.5 floors to 8 floors, as we saw last meeting, which was denied. Can you give me a feel if we go to the density projections you're proposing, what kind of adjustment we would need to make to our height restrictions in our heritage area, which is supposed to be protected?
Okay, thank you. Just to let you know, Councillor Ferguson, that's your time. So I'll let that question go and I'll put you on for a second time if you choose. Go ahead, Heather.
Through the chair, just to clarify, so we do have density targets in the official plan for our community nodes, which includes Ancaster and other nodes across the city, which has been proposed to increase to 150 persons and jobs per hectare. But we have made the exception that Ancaster's target will remain at 50 persons and jobs per hectare in recognition of the existing policies of the Ancaster-Wilson Street secondary plan, which does have some restrictions in terms of development potential in that area. So the density target for Ancaster is lower than the other community nodes across the city in recognition of the existing secondary plan permissions, and we're not proposing to change any of those secondary plan permissions through this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, well, that makes you more comfortable then, because it is a village founded in 1793, and we've done a great job over the decades protecting that, and it's under attack right now. So that makes me feel better. So my only concern now, Madam Chairman, well, I guess you want me to stop talking, don't you?
Yes.
So put me on a second time.
I will put you on for a second time, sir. Councillor Wilson, and then myself. Go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 quick questions at this point from me. I just want to thank staff for their work with the Indigenous peoples on the consultation. I found it really insightful and most valuable. I noted their concerns, I believe, with one feedback about concerns with affordability in and around the LRT corridor and what tools the municipality may have to advance affordability, secure affordability, or to address that. And I know yesterday at the LRT subcommittee, there was some discussion about the status of the municipality's future work as it pertains to inclusionary zoning. So I would like to ask staff, please, if they could comment on the capacity of of the municipality to recognize those comments from the Indigenous persons and others, and the ability for us to work in parallel with this proposed amendment to advance on an inclusionary zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to comment on that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, I could speak to the second part of that question related to inclusionary zoning, because as the councillor noted, that was discussed at the LRT subcommittee yesterday, and I did speak to it there as well. So if the councillor's okay with us taking your second question first, and then I'll ask other staff to respond to the first one.
Certainly. General Manager Jason Thorne.
Oh, sorry. Yes, General Manager of Planning Economic Development, Jason Thorne. So with respect to inclusionary zoning, and as was discussed at the LRT subcommittee yesterday, this first phase of work that you have in front of you today sets the stage for the growth strategy for the city. The next phase of work is some of the implementing policy, is the formal identification of the major transit station areas. And why that's important to inclusionary zoning is because under the provincial regulations, that is the only place you can apply inclusionary zoning. So that becomes one of the next steps for us in terms of on that path towards having an inclusionary zoning framework within the city, is to formally identify those major transit station areas. There is then a fair bit of work that has to happen in terms of the analysis that underlies inclusionary zoning. And I spoke to some of those yesterday. Some of that work has been done. So kind of there has been sort of this parallel process where a lot of the land needs assessment work that was done to get us here today becomes an important foundational piece for the analysis that is required to be done for inclusionary zoning. What would remain to be done, though, are a couple of key things, really two key things. One is from an inclusionary zoning standpoint, what is the target type of affordable housing, I guess if I could put it that way, within the corridor? So is the focus to be on affordable ownership, affordable rental, family size, affordable units, those types of things where we would need some discussion with the community as well as with our colleagues in housing in terms of what the target should be. And then also a significant amount of market analysis has to be done. And the reason that's important is because the way that inclusionary zoning works is the city would have to identify the types of buildings that would be eligible. So I think in Toronto, for example, they said it was for buildings of 100 units or more was kind of the threshold. We'd have to determine those sorts of thresholds. And then, of course, we have to make sure that the development market and the real estate market can then afford and sustain that affordability, because that is the funding model under inclusionary zoning, is the broader project has to fund the affordable units. So there's a fair bit of analysis that happens there around, I think what I called it yesterday was kind of that sweet spot of what level of affordability and what quantity of affordability the market can deliver through inclusionary zoning. So those are really the key pieces of analysis that have to then now be undertaken in order to apply that framework in the city. So what we are looking at is in early 2023 is when we would have that both the policy framework as well as the analysis for inclusionary zoning in front of council. And with that, I can ask, maybe, I don't know if it's Heather or someone else from the team can respond to the first question.
Could I?
So hang on a second. Councillor Wilson, you still have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just because ideas come and go so fleetingly, so I'm going to lose it if I don't ask it. Just a greater clarity on that, and I beg the indulgence of my colleagues who were not participating in yesterday's subcommittee, but there was a lengthy discussion about, while appreciating the need for a thorough and defendable methodology, as you've just outlined in terms of that market scan. The other, I think, just part of that discussion, GM Thorne and my through the chair, was we are kind of in a race against time, because we know we are investing in infrastructure, at least the senior orders of government are, that it is doing exactly what we wanted, in that it is enriching our assessment values. And in so doing, it is maybe precluding our opportunities or ability to provide for an inclusive community as defined by affordable community. So is there a way at this juncture to the general manager that we could, I thought you suggested to my colleague, Councillor Nan, that this was the body to deliberate it, and there would be an opportunity for us to put in an amendment perhaps or something that would reflect our commitment to moving ahead on that as part of our OPA. If I could seek that clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, yeah, certainly appreciate sort of that the sense of urgency around the provision of affordable housing, and I would say that is actually why it is put in this next stage of work. What you have before you is sort of a necessary initial step, but we do recognize the urgency, which is why it sort of is looked at as part of that next phase of work. I would note, bringing this forward in early 2023, unlike some other municipalities who have been introducing inclusionary zoning, we would, the intention is to have it in place well before the construction of the LRT. If you look at the municipalities that are pursuing it right now, City of Toronto, region of Waterloo, they have their LRTs built, operating and functioning. So with respect to urgency, appreciate that development is happening along the corridor all the time, but we would certainly be well ahead of where those municipalities were at by having an inclusionary zoning framework in place well before an LRT is up and running. Now, with respect to sort of advancing things, yes, Councillor, I did speak to Councillor Nan, as well as yourself after the LRT subcommittee. If it's the will of committee, then at this point you could advance things somewhat by at least establishing the conceptual location of where those major transit station areas are. I think we're in a decent position to be able to do that through this process because we do now have the LRT project back up and running. We have a sense of where those station areas are going to be. So that is certainly something that could happen now. And if it's the will of committee, we could identify within the OP now the intention to apply an inclusionary zoning framework to those major transit station areas. So that would certainly send the signal that that is the path that the city is on. Implementation, of course, would still be subject to that work that I mentioned previously. All of that analysis has to be done, and a special bylaw to implement it, and so on.
Yeah, thank you. I really
Councillor Wilson, that is your time, so I can put you on for a second time, please, if you don't mind. You're well over your time. That's why I was waiting for the question to finish being answered.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, Grace, and I would like to go back on because I would like to give my colleagues a heads up on the proposed amendment. That is very much in keeping with what GM Thorne said. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Ferguson, if you could take the chair, please. I'd like to ask my questions as a first-time speaker. So through you to either Delia, Alana, or Heather. So if I understand this properly, the application that comes in, or doesn't have to be an application now, for multi-residential, up to 6, up to 4, depending on where it is in the city, doesn't need a zoning and doesn't need an official planning amendment. What about the public information? Are we going to still require that they have community meetings? I always found, in my opinion, that secondary plans, policies give residents a bit of comfort knowing what to expect in their neighborhoods. Some people actually reach out to the councillors' offices and ask, what's planned for my neighborhood if I choose to buy here? So they are well informed and they're doing their due diligence. Now we're going to change this that says your next door neighbor can now put an apartment building in for 6 units. Is there any public input required or any information shared with the public on any of these changes that are coming to my next door neighbor's property?
I can speak to that through the chair. Just a few points of clarification. We are proposing these changes to the low density residential zones outside of secondary plan areas. As well, just as well to clarify that it's up to 3 or 4 units through conversion that does not require a zoning bylaw amendment.
Right.
In terms of the public process, applicants would be looking at obtaining a building permit unless there's any requirements of a minor variance, and they would go through that public process accordingly.
Okay, so my next door neighbor sells his house. They come in, they tear it down and want to put up 6 townhouses because we're saying that that's fine. It doesn't need an official plan amendment. How does the neighborhood have any input or even notified of this change in their neighborhood? If they don't have an official plan amendment or a zoning amendment, which requires public notice. So how does the public get notified when their next door neighbor is putting in 6 townhouses instead of 1? Or do they?
Through the chair, that specific example that you're providing would require a zoning bylaw amendment, and they would go through that public process through that application because they are looking to build new townhouses. This 3 or 4 unit we're speaking of is conversions.
Okay. So again, my next door neighbor has a gigantic house, wants to convert and put 4 apartments in there. How do I get notified of this if I do? Because now it's changing from a private property owner to 4 renters. A lot more is required there, as you know. I just wanted to know, how is it that because before it used to be variances, it used to be some sort of notification that the community had some input, or at least we were informed. I think that's more important, is that they become informed of these changes that are happening in their next door neighbors.
If I can assist, I think what we are talking about is a fundamental shift in planning framework. And there's been much reported about the end of exclusionary zoning. And that is essentially what is being presented today, sort of in 2 steps. So earlier today, we were talking through the SDU reform, which would allow 3 units on a property. What we're saying under today's thing, the changes to the official plan would be to facilitate the creation of the conversion of an existing dwelling to allow for up to 4 units. But we still have to, if council was to adopt this official plan amendment, then we would still have to come back with the necessary zoning bylaw amendments to give effect to that. And that is a fundamental shift, I think, and that is in response to how do we accommodate the household growth and projected 110,000 new households coming to Hamilton over the next 30 years. Some of that will be directed to the corridors, some of that will be directed to the nodes, and some of that will be directed to existing neighborhoods. The zoning would be as of right, and I think the neighbors would not be notified if the zoning is permitted as of right of a proposed change in use, save and except for some of the infill housing good neighbor policies that our building colleagues have put in place. But in that situation, Councillor, where somebody purchases a house, if this was to be approved ultimately, it could be 2-3 years down the road, a dwelling is purchased. If somebody wishes to convert it to 4 units, they would be entitled to convert that existing dwelling to 4 units, provided they met all of the applicable zoning bylaw regulations. The change is, today somebody could buy that house, add an accessory apartment to the principal dwelling and a detached accessory unit in the backyard and have 3 units on the property. They would be entitled to do that today, going into the building department and get the necessary permits. What we are suggesting is that we would update the OP regulations, and then come forward for a future public meeting with zoning bylaw changes that would allow somebody to have a total of 4 units on the property. That would be either 4 within the existing dwelling, or they could do the accessory laneway house and have 3 units in the building, or 2 units in the building and the laneway house. But it would allow them to do that as of right, and there would be no public notification requirements required. It is a fundamental shift in terms of those planning permissions, and it's what people characterize as the end of the yellow belt when they're talking about the City of Toronto, or the end of exclusionary zoning. And it's a way of providing additional housing opportunities while maintaining neighborhood character, because they would still have to provide the adequate parking. They would still be looking at developing front yard landscaping regulations, and it would be only for internal renovations of an existing building. So we see that in the lower city of Hamilton and around. That happens where people bought the old Victorian mansions. They convert them to 4-plexes, 5-plexes, or 6-plexes. We are not at this point talking about the demolition and reconstruction of a purpose-built apartment building. This would be to allow for a property owner to come into the building department to convert the existing dwelling to contain a maximum of 4 dwelling units. So that is really what is before committee today, and it is a fundamental shift. You are right, because today they can do 3, because the province has said you can have up to 3 through the secondary dwelling unit requirements that the province have said. We're just saying that why not allow, in order to meet our housing needs, to accommodate gentle intensification, to allow for multi-generational households and other housing opportunities, that we would allow for up to 4 units to be created as of right within an existing single detached dwelling. It is a fundamental policy shift, and I think that is why we said that, we've done this, we've already gone out for public consultation on these proposed zoning changes. And if the official plan amendment is adopted today and then forwarded to the province, we will then come back and have another round of public consultation on the zoning changes. And that'll be sort of the next step to help implement that. But even those zoning changes will not take effect until the province approves this official plan amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. That's my time. So I'll have to go out for the second time.
Just want to draw that to your attention.
So yeah, no, just to be consistent and to be fair, that was my time. It was the ding went off during that answer. So I'm going to go back on for the second time. I'll take the chair back, and we're going now to second time speakers. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Wilson, then myself. And again, folks, we got to keep an eye on quorum. We're going to be losing a committee member soon. So if anybody is listening in, can you please chime in? Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson, or sorry, yeah, Councillor Ferguson. Oh, Pearson, Councillor Pearson, you're up first.
Okay, so thanks, Madam Chair, and I appreciate all the previous speakers and certainly staff. I too continue to have very, very grave concerns. I don't know that the public actually understand what the impacts are going to be in all neighborhoods throughout the whole city of Hamilton. And this is what's concerning to me. I don't know how we're going to deal with that. You raise the issue, Madam Chair, of notification to the neighborhood. I mean, even if it's a situation saying, the ward councillor becomes aware, and if the ward councillor became aware of such intensification, because obviously if it's just a building permit application, we aren't going to get that either. You can have a neighborhood meeting, but there's absolutely nothing that can be done other than letting the residents know, guess what, this is happening in your neighborhood. I think I'm going to ask you, Madam Chair, my bigger question is going to be, so what happens, and I'm already facing this in developments, new developments in my ward, what happens with the infrastructure needs? And obviously you're looking at hydro, you're looking at water, you're looking at sewer capacity. How is that going to be addressed when you're looking at it in existing neighborhoods, not on the LRT route, which is obviously is going to be upgraded, but what about everywhere else throughout the city? Through you, Madam Chair, to staff, if they're available to answer.
Through Madam Chairman, so part of the infrastructure master plans that'll be implementing the city's growth strategy will be reflecting these revised population densities and number of households in terms of the inputs that we will then transfer over to our colleagues in Public Works for the purposes of developing the updated water and wastewater master plan, as well as the stormwater master plan and the transportation master plan as inputs. So they will be provided with those assumptions, and then as they are looking at the infrastructure required to accommodate new growth and development, that'll be factored into their modeling exercise to identify where there's areas that are required to have infrastructure upgrades to accommodate the projected increase in population and or households. It doesn't always translate into more people just by adding another dwelling unit. We use, I think, about 3.4 PPU in a single detached dwelling, where we say if you have an apartment, it's about 1.5. So in that case, you would end up having, if you only added one accessory unit, you'd have the same number of people. If you do add 3 or 4 units on the property, there is a potential you could have more PPU in that one individual house. But if it's only, I think it would be more of an issue if it was concentrated on one particular servicing segment. So if there was one street had all the units were to convert, then you may have an infrastructure issue. But if you spread it out over an entire neighborhood, it would be less of an impact to the infrastructure. But the water and wastewater, our colleagues in Public Works are fully aware of this, and they are, as part of their modeling analysis, looking at what would be the infrastructure upgrades required to accommodate the additional population over the next 20 to 30 years as a result of allowing gentle intensification within the existing single detached dwellings. Thank you.
So my last question, if I still have time, Madam Chair, yes, then to that, Mr. Robichaud, is currently in Scooby, Stony Creek, Fruitland, Winona secondary plan. Have we factored that in with regards to the future possibility of intensification and the sizing of the stormwater management ponds? Because that's already been an issue, and I don't believe that's any of this has even been factored in.
Through you, Madam Chairman, this would relate to the conversion of an existing dwelling. So from a stormwater management perspective, we don't anticipate there'd be any significant increase in pervious areas. But again, each of the traffic zones are getting these new sort of population allocations. And for doing the analysis and the infrastructure upgrades, it will have to be a consideration. In some areas, the lower Stony Creek, it is very flat and we are challenged. We know that in terms of a stormwater management perspective. So that'll have to be a consideration. There is a possibility that as we move through the modeling, that it may be that we have to look at how we put these regulations in place in some areas may not be appropriate, or that they wouldn't be appropriate until certain infrastructure upgrades happen, which may result in the need to put some lands into a holding zone that would allow for the existing single detached dwelling, or maybe one unit, but there may be a trigger point which would then have to not occur until such time as those infrastructure upgrades occur. But that has been part of the consideration and looking at that, the densification in terms of the population. We're not anticipating that it to be resulting in significant increases in the actual built form to accommodate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate all that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will continue to listen very intently.
Thank you. As promised, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I just simply can't accept the fact that you're not going to go through at least a rezoning when you're going to increase an existing residential unit to permit up to 4 families to be in there. That is trying to change the character of the community, and the neighborhood is entitled to know that this is coming and give comment on it. And so at the appropriate time, Madam Chair, I would like to place an amendment that any changes into the occupancy size, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, inside existing residential units, will be required to go through a rezoning process. Can I place that motion now? Because I didn't speak to it. I just placed the motion.
We'll do this at the, how about the amendment? I'll come back to you. Please keep in mind, I believe that by right, they are allowed to have up to 3. So just, you might want to check with Steve about the wording on that one. And then I'll come to you when we go to...
Up to 3, but that includes if you have a laneway house or you have a secondary residential unit. And I agree that you're allowed now to have 2. It's the 3 and 4 where I have trouble with it.
Okay.
And so the argument is that, well, you can have up to 3 now if you go to the residential units and you go to the second person living within the existing house. I just think it's a very slippery slope. I think it'll cause chaos in our communities, and we simply have to have a public process if someone wants to do that.
Okay, so I'll come to you before we go to the report. When we go to approve the report, there are going to be some more amendments coming forward, and I'll come to you at that time. So you may want to just check with Steve or one of the staff members to get the wording. Okay, so now we have Councillor Wilson and then myself. Councillor Wilson, second time.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I would like to continue the discussion that I started when I was on first. Thank you. And it pertains to, and I sent an email to committee members. It pertains to a discussion that was held over from yesterday at the LRT subcommittee. And I think GM Thorne stated that there is some methodological work that has to be done to inform the particulars of our inclusionary zoning bylaw when we have that deliberation, but that staff are in a position right now to take the step and to have it reflected in the documents that are before us now, that we can identify those major transit station areas, and we can indicate that there would be a policy coming forward. So I don't want to put words in GM Thorne's mouth. I just want to confirm that I heard that correctly and that we can have that amendment reflect those words. Thank you.
Right, and we will be doing that amendment at the same time at the very end when we're looking at the report. GM Thorne?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, the councillor heard me correctly, and yes, she is correct that we are in a position now. If council wants us to conceptually identify those transit station areas in the OP, we can do so, and we can include an initial policy stating the intention to move towards an IZ framework.
Thank you, councillor.
Thank you for confirming that, GM Thorne. The second question I have is. Chair Johnson, we received a delegation some time ago, I think over a year, and it was advocating for, as part of our commitment to biodiversity, bird-friendly provisions in our development practices. And I thought at the time, Chief Planner Robichaud that may have said, I'm probably wrong, but may have said that those sort of particulars would be forthcoming in when we reviewed our OPA amendments. I just would like insight, if I could, from Mr. Robichaud or Mr. Thorne. There is notation to sustainable development practices and those sorts of themes when I read the report. Is there any opportunity to go further than that with any bird-friendly design, or would that be in a different kind of document? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that, please? GM Thorne?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I'll let Steve confirm. I believe the reference at that time was to the site plan guidelines and green standards, but I'll let Mr. Robichaud speak to that.
Through you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Thorne is correct. That was the work that we are doing on our green development standards, as well as the work that we're also doing on our biodiversity strategy. So that we put a bit of a pause when working on the green development standards while we were focusing on this activity, but we are now re-engaging in that work to start bringing that forward as quickly as possible, both from the sustainability checklist, the urban green development standards, plus our biodiversity strategy to deal with the bird-friendly guidelines. I think it's an important consideration of how we serve our natural environment and our built form consideration. So we made the commitment to continue to develop those regulations and then report back in a comprehensive package on all of those elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor?
No, thank you to Mr. Robichaud for clarifying that for me so I can report accordingly. Appreciate that. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, if you could take the chair, please. Last second time speaker is myself. So Delia, just to be clear, this meeting, public meeting, I believe was advertised as a municipal comprehensive review on conversion of employment lands. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Chair. It was advertised in the newspaper. Oh, so it was advertised in the newspaper, and the public has been advised through updates to the project website that the amendments include employment land conversions that were approved by council previously.
So these are conversions that have already been approved, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so can I change your direction over here to page 22 of 35? Actually, it starts on page 21, and it's the employment land review, deferred employment land conversions. The last statement says that 2 additional sites, namely 1400 South Service Road, Stony Creek, and McMaster Innovation Park, Hamilton, have been deferred to council at the May 4th, 2022 General Issues Committee for consideration. I was not in attendance there, and I don't believe I read anything about that. Can you just give us an update on that one, please?
I'm going to allow my colleague Lauren Vreitz to speak to that matter. She was a staff person who brought forward the employment land review and the conversion report a few weeks ago.
Good morning, Councillor, through the chair. Sorry, my name is Lauren Vreitz, Policy Planner in Sustainable Communities. And yes, we did bring forward a report back to GIC regarding the deferred employment conversion requests. On May 3rd, we did provide a report back, and there were recommendations in there to move forward with a site-specific amendment for McMaster Innovation Park, and then to continue the deferral of 1400 South Service Road.
Okay, so, and my understanding is, my old understanding was that when an application is approved and go to the site plan, the only people who can appeal a site plan discussion is the applicant. In this case, if we convert the employment lands over to, if we choose not to convert them, there is no appeal on behalf of the property owner, correct? So if council chooses not to convert them, there's no appeal process, correct?
That is correct. Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I just want to be clear on that one. All right, thank you. Okay, so I believe those were my questions So this was advertised as conversions of employment lands, but the public was informed on the website that this is not just conversion of employment lands, this is also conversions of low residential, et cetera.
To assist the councillor, employment land conversions were just one element of the broader official plan amendment. So you are correct. It's not just solely, it was not advertised solely dealing with employment land conversions. It is to implement council's decision around the employment land conversions in addition of the other required elements to bring our official plan into conformity with the growth plan, i.e. The new population forecasts, new language around climate change, complete streets, Indigenous consultation, and we're updating some of our official plan policies on residential densities, all part of the first phase of the city's implementation of the Municipal Comprehensive Review Provincial Growth Plan Conformity exercise.
So Steve, just through you, Chair, just to be clear, this was advertised in the newspapers as something that was a small element of what we're dealing with, but it didn't really advertise everything we're dealing with, correct? Am I hearing that right?
No, it advertised everything we are dealing with in the OPA, of which employment land conversions are one of the elements in the OPA. Sorry, it's
what?
I want to make sure we're saying the same thing. I think we're trying to.
I think so I don't know if we are.
It was not advertised as only dealing with employment land conversions. It was advertised and it said, we are going to deal with 10 items, of which one is employment land conversions.
Did we note the other 9?
Yes.
Okay.
As part of that broader MCR OPA conformity exercise, yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you. I don't see any other speakers. So to receive the staff presentation, moved by Councillor Danko, second by Councillor Ferguson. Please vote accordingly. Yeah, Councillor Partridge was leaving at 11:45 as well. Thank you. It's carried. We have 5 delegates in front of us today, folks, just to remind you of the 5-minute time limit. So first up, we have the West End Home Builders Association. This is a video delegation. And we're loading it. So can we go to John Corbett first and then oh, never mind. Go ahead. All right. So here we go. No sound. So we're going to go ahead now. John Corbett from Corbett Land Strategies. Would you please come forward, turn on your video, and we'll work on the video that delegate that we have right now from the home builders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I trust you can hear and see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for taking my delegation this morning, Madam Chair, members of Planning Committee. My name is John Corbett. I'm representing the Upper West Side group. My presentation today is supplementary to a letter that we sent to committee dated May 16th of this year. And we're going to be speaking to our employment conversion request. This is not to deal with at all urban boundary expansion, which I'll explain in more detail. This map shows in yellow the areas that are subject to our employment land conversion. And so that encapsulates the areas both on the east and west sides of the proposed Gar Street extension, south of 20 Road West, and does include a proposal to extend Gar Street from 20 Road West into Dickinson Road, which is a key part of the airport-related infrastructure that we're proposing to front-end finance as part of this proposal. Again, the gray areas shown on this map are the White Belt lands, which are not subject to the employment conversion request or our discussions today. We have several items of planning justification for you today to discuss. Those yellow areas are approximately 55.2 hectares or 135.9 acres of employment lands. The justification for this employment conversion are actually quite dramatic and significant. I'm going to go through each one of them and the green points below. The first one is the introduction of desirable mixed-use sustainable development in proximity to the airport. I think a key area here, as much as that you're dealing with inclusionary zoning in mature areas of the city, another fundamental shift, as Mr. Robichaud said, is introduction of mixed-use development that reduces the need for automobile travel and walkability to major employment, and certainly the introduction of residential uses in this area delivers that that aspect to support the already designated urban development in proximity of the airport. Again, the provision of major infrastructure is a catalyst for development. As I mentioned at the outset, that a part of our proposal has always been that we would front-end finance the Gar Street extension, and this would be part of the employment conversion approval if committee decides and council decides to move forward with our request. It also provides a very interesting sustainable framework for planning in this part of the city. Two things of that regard, again, is the walkability between employment and the future residential precincts that we're proposing in our conversion lands, and also the fact that we are proposing and will construct a very sophisticated natural heritage system along the southerly boundary of this area. And that's a very important thing that is in there for environmental protection, not just for our employment conversion lands, but for the entire AEGD area. The next area is economic development and positive financial impact and delivery of complete communities. The Gar Street corridor in particular is, we're suggesting a shift in the traditional land use approach to that corridor into a mixed use environment. That's very positive from an economic development point of view, as well as providing stimulation for employment growth in and around the airport and the delivery of complete communities. And that's important too, because we've got a very mature neighborhood on the north side of 20 Road West that needs to be protected in the long term from industrial development, extensive and intensive warehouse, trucking dependent development around the airport. And the employment conversion that we're proposing in this area would provide a very significant land use buffer together with our green corridor as part of the natural heritage system. So those residents would be protected forever with a very distinct buffer and compatible land use transition into their AEGD. Positive employment impact. As I mentioned, it's a very significant thing. I think even the airport authority themselves have mentioned in the past, not too recent past, that they would like to see some residential development created as a labor source for all the development that's beginning to happen in around the airport. And this certainly would deliver that in very direct proximity to those end users. Achieve needed housing supply. We've heard today that a very ambitious intensification strategy is necessary to achieve the growth forecasts as part of your MCR. Again, this is a way to actually add to your housing supply without expanding the urban boundary, as these lands are already within the urban boundary defined by the existing official plan and your new official plan that's under consideration today. The last element is providing affordable and attainable housing, and that's important for the city as a whole during the housing crisis that we're experiencing, but also because it provides that labor supply for those people in and around. And our land group has been very committed from the beginning of the consideration of the Upper West Side community that we will provide both affordable and attainable housing in consultation with staff and housing agencies associated with the city of Hamilton. So our request is simple, moving forward, and that you would not deny, as recommended previously, our employment land conversion. In fact, approve it and move it forward as a unique part of your municipal comprehensive review. Thank you very much for your attention this morning, and I would be available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can you please take down your presentation?
Sure, will. Thank you.
And I'm going to look to the panel to see if there are any questions. And I'm seeing none. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much.
And we're on to Nick Wood of Corbett Land Strategies.
Actually, I spoke for Nick Wood as well. So.
Oh, thank you. That's good to know.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. So now we have Dr. Linda Lukasik from Environment Hamilton, please. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I got a few minutes of the morning left. Yes. Good morning, Chairperson Johnson and members of the Planning Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today at this statutory public meeting under the Provincial Planning Act for the Grids 2 MCR proposal for accommodating population and job growth in the city of Hamilton to 2051. And I just want to say that Environment Hamilton stands firm in our support for no urban boundary expansion. Given the fact that we're in a climate emergency, a firm boundary is the best option moving forward to ensure that we build a climate resilient future for our city. And of course, we're also facing a housing affordability crisis. And with the right municipal level policies combined with necessary supports and policy shifts at the provincial and federal levels, a firm urban boundary is what's going to leverage urban growth that provides a broader spectrum of housing options for Hamiltonians, including a wider range of costs for purchased and rented housing. So we are now, as an organization, actively engaging in efforts to support the shift in the direction of climate resilient, inclusive city building. And we're working hard to engage and inform Hamiltonians, encouraging others to stand with us in support of this urgently needed shift in approach to urban growth management. So that's why, for instance, yesterday, Environment Hamilton's Ian Borsick represented us at a press conference and then delegated to the LRT committee, calling on the city to move faster with the development and implementation of an inclusionary zoning policy that would facilitate the provision of more affordable housing around major transit station areas, including the LRT stops and GO stations. And that's why you'll see our name alongside the West End Home Builders, an organization I will admit we are not always aligned with, the Hamilton Burlington Society of Architects and Emma Cubitt's Laneway Suites and SDUs in Hamilton group on the letter supporting the staff proposed modifications and updates to the city's SDU regulations. We are all aligned in our support for SDUs, and we want to ensure municipal policy works to encourage the establishment of more SDUs, in other words, more housing across our city. The rules should facilitate this process while also balancing the need to build climate resilience and to ensure that these units are being built and used as intended to house more Hamiltonians. The SDU regulation is one piece of a vision moving forward that will work to facilitate the creation of a spectrum of forms of housing within our urban boundary. And I just want to end today by saying that we do worry about what may come next with this process. We applaud the city's decision to keep the boundary firm, and we also want to express our great gratitude to city planning staff for all the work that they've done to pull together a lot of information and a new direction very quickly. But we know that the provincial government appears poised to undo this democratic decision. We understand from city planning staff that planners at Ontario's Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing have yet to provide feedback on the plan before you today, despite the expectation that such feedback would be provided within 90 days of city staff submitting Hamilton's proposed pathway forward back on January 11th. And this, to me, is cause for concern, and it makes me worry that the provincial government does intend to do an end run around local democracy. The majority decision that came out of the November 2021 General Issues Committee, your decision to vote for a firm urban boundary, was rooted in a response to community support, which I will note continues today when you see the number of submissions, written submissions from community members that are appended to the agenda. This also needs to be said. The proposal before you conforms with the provincial requirements set out in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So Minister Clark, the current Provincial Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, really has no valid reason not to allow Hamilton to proceed on the proposed pathway forward. So we stand with you, I guess, is also an important part of my message today regarding this plan. And we are already and will continue to actively work to facilitate this shift towards climate resilience and inclusivity. And thank you very much for the chance to speak today.
Thank you, Dr. Lukasik. Could you just remind everybody what your PhD is in, please?
Yeah, I have a PhD in planning, Councillor.
Thank you. I always like to point that out. Any questions for Dr. Lukasik, please? Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one question. Dr. Lukasik mentioned that the current MCR that's in front of us today does conform to the provincial requirements, and that Minister Clark would have no recourse to deny it based on the fact that it does conform to the municipal, to the provincial requirements. I'd just like to give her an opportunity to elaborate on specifically in her evaluation of what's before us today, how it does conform to those provincial requirements.
Linda?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes. So my understanding, and I do rely on other experts who understand the legal ins and outs of how this works. So I've certainly, I've heard opinions expressed by people, including Mr. Phil Pothen from Environmental Defense, and he's a land use planning lawyer who's certainly dug into the details and helped many of us to understand that municipalities do have the ability to determine housing mix. And so the plan that the City of Hamilton has put forward does include a mix of housing opportunities, and it has been designed to accommodate the growth projections in both population and jobs at the provincial level. That accommodation has happened. So my understanding is that what has been put together through public consultation and, of course, through a whole lot of hard work from our municipal planning staff does satisfy the requirements and has taken into consideration the flexibilities that the municipality has to put a plan together and a vision together for how that municipality will evolve and grow into the future. So I hope that answers.
It does. Thank you. Just one follow-up question. One of the specifics that's often mentioned as a challenge is to meet the market demand requirements that the province has imposed. And market demand depends on who you ask, but is often interpreted to mean market demand equals sprawl single-family homes. So in your evaluation, Dr. Lukasik, of what's before us today, how is that market demand being interpreted, and does market demand always have to mean sprawl single-family homes?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I'll add to this, part of the challenge that we've observed is that a lot of the interpretation of market demand involves looking back in time. And I think that's a huge problem. So we have to be forward looking. And I would say anyone who's looking around and seeing what's happening within our municipality already will realize that that old adage, if you build it, they will come, holds true. So I'm in the Centennial neighborhood, and I can tell you that I'm already seeing signs up for things like condominium developments that have already sold out along the LRT line, hence our concern about inclusionary zoning. But I'm also seeing higher density. If you head out towards the Scooby lands, you see stacked townhome developments that sell out very quickly. So I think what we're seeing is a shift in what people are looking for in the type of housing options that they're choosing. It may be related to the cost of housing, but I think it's also related to a strong and growing interest in a different kind of living opportunity. I'm even seeing, one example that I find fascinating is across from Fiesta Mall on Highway 8 in Stony Creek. There's a development that's gone up there, and you can be sure what's happening there is a shift. You have a lot of people who live in large single-family homes in those surrounding neighborhoods who are aging and they don't necessarily want to leave their neighborhood. But up until more recently, there haven't been viable choices for them to stay in the neighborhood, but shift into something more manageable. So there's a really interesting example of a shift that, if facilitated through the right kind of development, is also going to free up those single family homes that so many, including our current provincial government, seem to be fixated on. So I think you're going to see a natural opening up of that kind of housing for people who really want to choose it. So that existing single family housing stock, but also we need to be paying attention to that transit oriented development. We have examples emerging right now. We have other really exciting opportunities for this kind of redevelopment on the horizon. And I'll point to, in spitting distance of the neighborhood I live in, Eastgate Square, where a new owner is already talking about moving ahead with some pretty amazing mixed use, higher density development. And you can be sure people will purchase and people will move into those units. So again, I hope that answers your question.
Councillor?
It does. Thank you, and very much appreciate the perspectives.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Lukasik. I'd like to get at some of the themes in your delegation, but also more specifically to your answers to Councillor Danko just now. And if I could start at a higher level and then drill down, I think, to some of your positions and why. I've noticed that Environment Hamilton, within the context of sustainability and within the context of an urban boundary, has often aligned itself on matters of like the just recovery and equity. And what is the relationship, or how are the goals of equity, good planning, sustainability, and inclusive neighborhoods, how does that work itself out into the as of right permissions that are set out in this report? So 4 units, for example, in a neighborhood that may have been exclusively off the radar for families.
Through you, Chair, yes, good question. And I'm going to start by just stating very emphatically that I don't think any of us are convinced that outward expansion is going to provide that affordable housing, that deeply affordable housing that we really need in our city. So that's number one. I think all of us agree that outward expansion is costly from a financial point of view, but also within the context of climate crisis, of course, loss of prime farmland, loss of natural open spaces that help us to manage with extreme weather impacts and all of that sort of thing. When you move into talking about the elimination of exclusionary zoning, and it's been interesting listening to the conversation today, I think there are a lot of concerns being raised, but I'll add that to this, that a lot of what we're going to see happen in terms of even the gentle density, it's more likely, as the patterns already are showing, to happen first in the older parts of the city, which I think makes a whole lot of sense, because we're going to see a focus on nodes and corridors where people will be very close to transit and higher order transit, and then we'll see intensification radiate out from there. And that's where it just makes so much sense in low density residential neighborhoods that have been very exclusively zoned for single family homes only, for us to be able to see that gentle density happen over time. And I think we have to avoid assuming that there's suddenly going to be this explosion and these neighborhoods are going to be overwhelmed. I agree it's a shift, and it's something we need to keep on talking about, and we need to make sure that we get it right. I think some of what we've seen recently, for instance, with the second dwelling unit zoning and some of the challenges with interpretation are case in point. It's going to be a process that unfolds over many years. We're going to need to adapt and tweak the process. People are also going to need to get used to the change. And it's funny because I think about where we're sitting in Hamilton right now with a lot of our urban neighborhoods. I contrast it to, I have a brother who lives in Roncesvalles in Toronto with his partner. Yep. Mm-hmm. And what you see there has evolved over time, and it's very different, and it's accepted to a large degree. what has happened there in terms of gentle density and accommodating more people where it makes most sense. So to your question, which I think is at the heart of this, the inclusivity piece, this is really the kind of urban intensification that can open the door, if done right, to providing a broader spectrum of housing options. And again, I'm going to acknowledge that we need to be paying attention to municipal level policies that facilitate that. You know, for instance, in Toronto, they've got programs in place where if you build a laneway suite, the city will help you out if you're willing to keep rent lower for a little bit longer. We're having more conversations about the need for rent control. So as we work to provide more rental units within the urban area, we need to be thinking about that and how can we make that piece work. And then, of course, there's this broader issue of the commodification of housing, where I think we all acknowledge that we need provincial and federal government to undo some of what's happened at those levels, but also to facilitate the ability of cities to be able to move in a direction of providing that spectrum of housing. But I think what we're talking about here in the shift that is being supported with this urban boundary is a really, really important step at the municipal level. And it is going to provide the leverage to enable us to make all of these other pieces hopefully flow out of this critical step.
Councillor Wilson, this is time, but you're the only one on the speakers list, so I'll let that, unless somebody else wants to ask a question of Dr. Lukasik. Seeing none, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Dr. Lukasik, you've confirmed for our chair that you have a doctorate in planning. It's a relatively new phenomenon. I would like to go back one step and ask you, what is exclusionary zoning and who are we excluding when we practice it?
Yeah, so exclusionary zoning refers to zoning that only permits, in usually it's you know it permits exclusively single family homes within lower density, and the areas that subsequently become lower density areas. And so you'll hear talk about this in Toronto. There's lots of reference to the yellow belt, and it's large swaths of that city where the zoning only permits single, and it may permit semis as well, but nothing beyond that. And if you look at Hamilton, we have a lot of the same happening in most of our urban neighborhoods where there are those restrictions in place. You know, that obviously has started to change with the second dwelling unit policy, which does give homeowners as of right an opportunity to introduce more units. But up until that shift, we've been in the same situation where that exclusionary zoning exists, and it only enables people who can afford to purchase a single family home or potentially to rent a single family home to be able to make a choice to live in that neighborhood.
So thank you. So thank you for clarifying that. When we're talking about exclusionary zoning, we're excluding people. If you can't probably on the market today get a single family home for under 800,000, we're necessarily excluding people from moving into that neighborhood based on income. That's a form of segregation by income. And we're excluding people, I thought I heard you confirm, Dr. Lukasik, that we're also excluding people from reconfiguring internally their house so they have the capacity to stay and age in that neighborhood or maybe be joined by multi-generational families. We're excluding their ability to live longer in that place and have the financial means to further carry that house as they become maybe on a fixed income. Can you confirm that?
Thank you for the question.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that is correct. And, you know, I'm going to use my brother and his partner as an example again, because when they purchased their home in Roncesvalles, a semi-detached home, it was a while ago, but it was still costly. And for them, having a second dwelling unit within that primary residence is what enabled them to be able to purchase and to carry the mortgage on that property. And you can be sure there are a lot of other people in Toronto who are sitting in the same position where home ownership was not even an option without that ability to make that choice. And as the primary inhabitant of that residence to be able to rent a unit out within it. So I'd argue the same holds true in Hamilton. I mean, I think we're all aware how costly the market has been, you can be sure that there are a lot of young families wanting to make that choice to move into a home in the city. And that second dwelling unit option is what's going to make it financially viable for them. And at the same time, will hopefully provide an affordable rental unit for someone else in the city who needs a place to live, and an opportunity for them to live in ground-based housing with a yard. And I think that's a nice option for people who are really leaning in that direction as well.
Yes. Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Wilson?
No, I appreciate that insight offered by Dr. Lukasik. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see any other speakers. So, Doctor, thank you for joining us this morning. Now it's the afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care. So thank you. And I have Craig Burley. There you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks for hearing my delegation on the Municipal Comprehensive Review. You heard the list of names at the beginning of the presentation of the dozens and dozens, 112 people wrote in regarding this statutory meeting. And of course, the excellent staff presentation at the beginning here mentioned the 18,000 surveys that were returned, the thousands of other contacts that were made with you regarding much of it regarding the issue, of course, of the urban boundary. The public overwhelmingly supported freezing the current urban boundary, and two issues in particular were at the forefront of that: climate justice and the need to make smart, sensible growth that will allow us to keep these changes permanently and to grow our population. And the protection of farmland and the protection of farmers, not just as a culture and as a lifestyle, but as a food security matter. The public was overwhelming about this, and I thank you and thank the council for having supported the changes to the under the existing MCR. People really do support this, and we know that there may be a need to further defend these principles that you've upheld so far. And I want you to know that so many of us support you in that as well. A couple of members of the committee mentioned today concerns regarding the multi-unit conversion as of right that the plan will allow. Councillor Pearson saying that she doesn't think the public understands this issue.
Craig, excuse me, I've asked this in the past, and I don't know if you are aware. If you're going to refer to whatever a councillor, just make it generic, please, because then they can pull a point of order and interrupt your speech. So let's just go, a councillor said.
Sure.
If you don't mind, please, just to keep it on the respectful side, that would be great.
No, not at all. All I wanted to do was address the points that the public doesn't understand these new rules regarding potential intensification in their neighborhoods, or that the character of the neighborhood is affected by these. I want to remind the committee we have a crisis. Chaos was invoked in terms of the conversion of existing single-family homes into 3 or 4 dwelling units. We have this now going on in my neighborhood in Ainsley Wood, and we have for many, many years, decades now. This neighborhood has been changing as existing single-family homes are purchased and transformed into what are essentially unlicensed rooming houses. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 individuals living somewhere where 1 or 2 or 3 may have been before. It's not chaotic. It has its challenges, and it certainly does impose a need to monitor and understand the changes to infrastructure needs and so forth. But this intensification has to happen throughout our community, because this intensification has to happen throughout the existing boundary in order for us to meet our targets. We cannot continue to sprawl as we grow. If we continue to sprawl as we grow, our other much more important and deeper challenges won't be met and we will fail in our attempt to meet climate change head on. We need to think intensively, and we need to think about how each of us will live differently in all of our neighborhoods. It can't all be dumped on the corridors. All of our neighborhoods need to intensify, and that does mean welcoming more people onto each of our streets.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry. The yawn interrupted me there. Forgive
I'm
me.
sorry, Craig, I don't know where that came from. So just, can we make sure everybody's muted, please, including those that are waiting to speak? Thank you. My apologies, Craig, go ahead.
Sorry, I just need 10 seconds. A couple of items from the written correspondence I wanted to address. One was an issue about boxed in areas within the urban boundary. I think it does make a lot of sense where there's an area that's boxed in by urban boundary expansions that have happened piecemeal over time. I think it does make sense to think about transforming those areas that otherwise would be outside but are boxed in by urban areas to be admitted to the boundary. Another was the request from certain, and forgive me, I'm trying to find a way to express this, certain mall-based parties were representing a desire to allow for a phased-in development of their intensification goals. And I just wanted to address that quickly and say, phasing in those circumstances does raise the possibility of allowing them as of right to develop those particular areas at a much lower level of intensification, with plans continually pushed off into the future to make greater intensification in later areas. I think adding a phased in expansion, adding a phased in of higher targets as of right under the plan is probably not a good idea for those reasons. There's no reason why one can't meet the goals of higher intensity development on an ongoing basis, as opposed to selling the low intensity selling a low intensity development first with a plan to supplement it later on. That's all that I have for you, and thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And again, my apologies. I don't know where the noises were coming from.
I do.
Are there any questions or comment? Any questions of the presenter, please? Seeing none, which thank you very much, Craig, for taking the time today. In fact, thank you to all the delegates for taking the time today. We're going to try this video delegation now and see whether or not it's working.
Thank you, members of council, for your attention to my virtual delegation today. Our association represents more than 300 members, and our industry contributes more than 20,000 jobs, generating $1.3 billion in annual wages. The West End Home Builders Association has been a key partner to the City of Hamilton as city builders, and we are excited for the future growth of our city. Hamilton is a great place to live. With 3 colleges and universities, international talent from all over the world is choosing to make Hamilton home. The ability of our city to attract people and jobs is a success story that we should all be proud of. However, this growth has also presented Hamilton with challenges. One such challenge is that we haven't built enough housing to keep up with our population growth, and people, especially those with children, are beginning to choose elsewhere when they could have chosen Hamilton. Between 2015 and 2020, Hamilton lost between 13,000 and 15,000 people to surrounding communities due to a lack of housing. Through our official plan, we must find ways to make it easier to build all types of housing to address this housing crisis and encourage people to choose Hamilton. While our organization had supported an urban boundary expansion and significantly increased intensification as a balanced approach put forward by Hamilton's professional planning staff, we recognize that council has made a decision to proceed with an even higher rate of intensification. As such, our deputation today focuses solely on how Hamilton can make the best of this opportunity to rethink Hamilton's entire planning framework to facilitate higher levels of intensification. I'll start with zoning. We HBA is supportive of the initial steps towards eliminating exclusionary zoning. As the new residential zoning bylaw comes forward, we look forward to continued engagement to enable more housing options in neighborhoods. We'd also like to provide a high-level overview of our recommendations on the official plan policies. Our association is supportive of the changes to enable higher densities both within the downtown and throughout the entire built-up area. We strongly encourage the city to support transit-oriented communities. We believe the best way to do this is to eliminate parking requirements, as this incentivizes car use and builds the cost of car storage into the cost of a home. We wish to encourage the city to be bold in its approach and consider a full removal of minimum parking requirements. Within Hamilton's neighborhoods, it's important to encourage all types of residential housing. Outlining these permissions in the official plan is key to ending exclusionary zoning. Existing neighborhoods should be targeted for incremental growth and change over the coming decades. We HBA is supportive of the change towards as-of-right medium density, but we do have significant concerns with the prescriptive language being applied. We appreciate city staff taking the opportunity to align mid-rise height limits to align with the upcoming building code changes, allowing for tall wood buildings up to 12 stories. We wish to caution the city on their use of angular planes being set out in the official plan, as they would have significant drawbacks for energy efficiency due to thermal bridging and create very complex and expensive building structures. Other jurisdictions are actually moving away from this counterproductive policy. Furthermore, all policies outlined in the subsection will make it very difficult to achieve anything over 6 stories when working together, therefore limiting intensification potential. This does not represent an as-of-right planning framework to facilitate intensification. It may have the appearance as such, but virtually all applications will still be required to go through the full process. Similar to WHB's concerns with policy E358, we strongly support additional height allowances, but feel the prescriptiveness of the policy will make higher levels of intensification on sites that might otherwise have been suitable candidates difficult to achieve without an official plan amendment. This 30-story height cap. We cannot support this change to the official plan. We HBA believes that this is a planning by negotiation approach rather than appropriately planning for growth. This policy runs contrary to the city's stated goals of intensification. There are already proposed developments seeking planning heights greater than the escarpment limit throughout the city. This is an overly prescriptive approach and limits intensification potential within Hamilton. We HBA echoes our earlier concerns about the use of angular planes, stepbacks, and other requirements limiting as-of-right potential for growth. Furthermore, we have concerns about the requirement for multiple land uses being required on a high-density site. The West End Home Builders Association would be pleased to partner with the City of Hamilton on their ongoing monitoring of the official plan policies. It should be recognized that Bill 109 and the More Homes for Everyone plan includes a much stronger focus on consistent data standards across Ontario and monitoring to ensure that better data underpins housing and planning decisions. In conclusion, the policy you approved today governs how Hamilton's housing system functions. Having in place permissive, flexible, and predictable planning policies with a vision towards the future will serve Hamilton well. Housing affordability and home prices are driven by many factors, but they are significantly impacted by the available supply and approval timelines for new construction. We need to keep units moving through the planning and production system. Streamlining the addition of new housing supply in Hamilton across the entire income spectrum eases pressure on housing affordability. Staff have put forward to you today an important guiding document for growth. It is important to recognize that while some further tweaks should be made, the improvement towards more flexibility to facilitate intensification is positive. We HBA strongly supports a more permissive approach to planning with as-of-right zoning for intensification projects, as we absolutely need more room to grow. Thank you. Thank you, members of council, for your attention to my virtual delegation today. Our association represents...
Oh, that wasn't us. Yeah, so that's a loop. It was on a loop. So that's why it was ended so abruptly. So folks, I need Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Wilson, to receive all the delegations today. And we have a number 1 from Councillor Wilson. Go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. And I suspect you'll guide me accordingly. To state the obvious, it is my absolute privilege and honor to represent the residents of Ward 1 and also to be a member of this council. And in my time here, I try to, even when I disagree fervently with a delegate that is before us, to afford them the respect and to admire them for their willingness to participate in this democratic exchange and take time out of their busy day. So to that end, I would like to extend my own personal apologies to Mr. Burley and his delegation for the manner in which he was interrupted and the way in which he was interrupted. I find it really regrettable, and I hope it will not preclude him from participating in the future. Thank you.
Okay, as I said earlier, I don't know where the noises came from, and I did apologize because we did not have everybody muted.
I do.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm not as observant, obviously. Okay, so we have the registered delegations. We have the mover and the seconder. Councillor Ferguson's not here, so we're just going to go with Councillor Pearson, Councillor Wilson to receive the delegates, please. Oh, there you are. Please vote accordingly. Are we getting everyone in? Councillor Ferguson, are you thumbs up, please?
Yeah, the vote didn't come up. I'm not sure why, whether
Okay,
Lisa can
so
fix that. I'll
thank
give you
you.
a thumbs up though.
Thank you. Then at the same, Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Wilson, to receive all the written submissions that were sent in. And thank you to everyone that did write in. There was over 100 of them. Please vote accordingly or thumbs up. Councillor Ferguson, thumbs up. He's got it up. There we go. And moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Danko, to close the public meeting. Yeah, so Councillor Ferguson, we're not getting your vote in, so can you just give us a thumbs up from now on, please, just for until we fix it at our end?
Has Lisa got me connected there because the vote's not coming over? Okay, thumbs up.
Just not, yeah, she's got you here.
I'll hit F5.
Thank you, and moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Danko, that the public submissions were received and considered with this application, approving it or denying it. Thank you. Vote accordingly. And thank you. Thank you. And finally, just to put the report on the floor, please, moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Danko, that it is on the floor. And before we vote or anything, I'm going to go with Councillor Wilson for your amendment, please. And then I'm going to go to Councillor Ferguson because I understand you had one as well. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks so much, Chair. I did email the proposed wording of the amendment to all my colleagues on this committee. And so in order to, I'd like to read the amendment if I have it correctly here. In order to...
Just a second, please. Elsie, Kelsey, do you have it in your email? We can post it on the, so that the public also can follow along with Councillor Wilson.
Excellent.
I just find it so much easier for the public to...
For sure.
There we go. Go ahead.
In order to advance, it is moved by myself, in order to advance the city's work to implement an inclusionary zoning framework within the city of Hamilton, that staff be directed to incorporate into the MCR Phase 1 OPA a schedule identifying the conceptual locations of the city's major transit station areas and a policy indicating the city's intent to implement an inclusionary zoning framework with respect to those major transit station areas. Thank you, Elsie, Kelsey. I need a seconder, please.
Thank you, Councillor Danko.
Appreciate that, Councillor Danko. As I noted in my comments earlier, Chair, the policy the permission is there from the province of Ontario. They've provided also a more scoped area for where inclusionary zoning can be, unfortunately, in my opinion, but it is around high order transit and transit major transit stations. As GM Thorne noted, staff are there or just about there in the identification of those stations, and I believe he said this is doable. So I would request your support as we move along this step, and there's further methodology to be provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this? Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I've got a question to Chief Planner Robichaud. Can you just remind us, Steve, what IZ zoning is, what its definition is?
Steve Robichaud?
My apologies. To the councillor, inclusionary zoning is a legislative framework that allows a municipality to require that a portion of units within a development be affordable and that they be set aside to be affordable, whether that's affordable ownership or affordable rental. In Ontario, the province is allowed or put in place an inclusionary zoning framework that municipalities can adopt, but it's limited to only being within what's defined as major transit station areas, which would essentially be the LRT station stops as they relate into the Hamilton context. So as Mr. Thorne indicated, part of the issue was, and unless you have an approved design and funding commitment for your LRT network, you don't really have MTSAs under the provincial legislation. So when the province withdrew the funding a couple of years back for the LRT, we wouldn't meet the definition and the legislative tests to do inclusionary zoning around the MTSAs. So although Heather Travis and her team had been doing a lot of work around the major transit station area planning, we sort of had to put a pause on that work until the funding was recommitted by the province, which now allows us to move forward with the next step, which is completing the secondary planning process around each of the station stops, which are the major transit station areas. And then, as Mr. Thorne indicated, going through that land economics pro forma process to determine what would our inclusionary zoning framework look like, and then bring those two pieces together into an implementing official plan amendment and then subsequent bylaws to give effect to that planning process. And the intent is we will be doing that work over the summer, fall, and into early and reporting back early next year on what an inclusionary zoning framework in Hamilton could look like with the necessary draft instruments for public consideration and ultimately, hopefully, council adoption. And then they would come into force and effect at a future point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Two comments on that, Madam Chair. Number one is if the mover or the clerk could spell out what IZ means, because if the public reading wouldn't know. They've done that with the MTSA. They explain what it is, major transportation areas. So if you put in brackets or put the IZ in brackets and call it inclusionary zoning, that'd be helpful to readers, I would suspect. And the second part is, so Steve, you're saying the only MTSA in the city will be the stops along the LRT route?
Mr. Robichaud?
That is the way that they are defined, that you need to have the transit station stops within a higher order transit system. So a bus stop would not meet that test under the current way the legislation is worded, as I understand it. It really relates more to the LRT station stops as being our MTSAs for the purposes of advancing an inclusionary zoning regime. As Mr. Thorne indicated, the City of Hamilton, we endorse the concept of inclusionary zoning, and we encourage the province to make it as broad as possible of a tool. But unfortunately, when they came forward with the implementing legislation and regulations, they really scoped it in terms of its applicability and where and how you can use it. However, if it does have that opportunity, the benefit is, you get something that currently you're getting nothing as it relates to increasing the supply of affordable housing. That's why philosophically as staff and as an organization, we've been looking at moving forward with that inclusionary zoning framework as part of that continuum of how we respond to the affordable housing challenge and issues. So whether that be through the work that was done relating to, the pre-zoning the corridor, the work that's going on right now with finance in terms of the community benefit charges, the consultation on family-friendly housing guidelines, and then at the next planning committee dealing with update to our condo conversion policies. All of those pieces fit together in terms of some of our policy responses in terms of how we respond to the inclusionary or the affordable housing challenge. And sorry, I just had corrected. We can also look at applying an inclusionary zoning framework around our major GO stations as another part of that consideration. So that would be identified based on what the councillor's motion was, the major GO stations as well as the proposed LRT station stops as they represent that higher order transit system within the City of Hamilton. Thank you.
Thank you. So to make it clear, I wonder if the mover would consider defining it, saying it's the major GO station stops and the LRT routes. When it says to those major transit station areas, which is the LRT stops and the GO stations, major GO stations. Would the mover consider putting that in the motion so it's clear?
So I'm going to go to the mover, Councillor Wilson. Those suggestions, are you okay with the amendment to your amendment? For better clarity, according to Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, because my understanding of the legislation, the permissive legislation as put out by the provinces, that's the only place in which we can do it now. So I have absolutely no problem in unpacking those definitions.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Ferguson, your time's up. Do you have any other?
Clerks will make that change. Thank you.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so with those changes, can you please vote accordingly? Or thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever's easier. Oh, good. Councillor Ferguson's vote came in. But it does, oh, there we go. Thank you. So thank you very much. Councillor Wilson, your amendment is done. So we're now going to Councillor Ferguson. You also had an amendment you would like to propose? And who's your seconder? And here's the amendment on the screen, folks, if you want to read along. Can we just scroll that down a little bit? So the red should say, third line down, to a maximum of 2 dwelling units to the zoning bylaws of the former communities of and former city of Hamilton and Stony Creek. So, Councillor Ferguson, do you want to read that out?
Yeah, the plan adoption of the draft urban official plan amendment and rural Hamilton official plan amendment attached to appendices A and B respectively through report PED 21067B. Planning staff be directed and authorized to prepare the implementing zoning bylaw to a maximum of 2 dwelling units to the zoning bylaw for the former communities of Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Glanbrook, and Hamilton, and Stony Creek, and schedule a statutory public meeting for the planning committee to consider the proposed changes to the zoning bylaw in the former communities. This would require a rezoning application to add a 3rd or 4th dwelling unit. So that's my amendment to, if you go above 2, because we already permit 2, so that there would be a rezoning process. I think that we will get a lot of pushback if homes suddenly start, at least in my community, I can't speak for others, that if we started going into residential areas, that if people start putting in 4 apartments, if you will, in one single family home, you say you're going to have a parking space for each one, but I find most people in my community have 2 cars. So that would be 8 cars parked on the street, and that wouldn't be fair to the neighbors and radically change the character. So all I want to do is to allow it to go through the process of a rezoning so the public is made aware and make comments, as a number of my colleagues also indicated. So that's my motion, if I can get a seconder.
Seconder. Is anybody willing to second Councillor Ferguson's motion, please? I don't see a seconder, Councillor Ferguson. I'm sorry. So the amendment isn't going to be submitted for voting if we don't have a seconder. All right. So now we're back to approving the report recommendations as amended. So it has been moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Danko, to approve the report recommendations as amended. Any comments, questions before we do that? Seeing none. Thank you. Councillor Pearson, thumbs up or down, please. Oh, sorry, thank you. We're holding off the vote for a second. I didn't see Councillor Pearson. The clerk just notified me. I'm not on WebEx, folks, because this is all done virtually here, so we just had to rely on the clerks. So Councillor Pearson, you did have a question. My apologies.
No, it's okay, Madam Chair, and I tried to sign as well. My apologies as well. So I just want to clarify. So we have the recommendation before you said is amended. I'm assuming that amendment is Councillor Wilson's amendment,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Which I did support, so I still support that. But on the overall amendment with regards to no urban boundary expansion, I am not supportive of that. So I will oppose the recommendation before us, but I did support Councillor Wilson's amendment as it's a bit out of the scope of this whole MCR as well, because it's just clarification. So I just wanted that clarified going forward, and that's how I will vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Are we still okay to keep voting? So Councillor Pearson is voting down. No, thank you for the public record. Okay, folks, thank you. We're now on to motions. There are none. No notices of motion. It says general information and other business. I did promise Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Danko to come back to you to ask staff questions, and then we'll go to the GM, Jason Thorne, for his update. So why don't we start first? Councillor Ferguson, you wanted an update on 256 Lime Kiln Road, correct?
Yeah, and so I just want to make sure Heritage staff, I've been reading some emails from Ken Coit and Steve Robichaud. There's the old Firestone estate, and when I look at the picture that Ken sent me, it looks like that's the Firestone estate. I was in that house a few years ago. Someone else bought it and lived in it, someone we all know, and it seemed like a very, to my expectation, has significant heritage features. You know, it was the home of the original owners of the Firestone Rubber Company, who made a lot of tires, and it's on a large estate lot. So I assume I can't find the stone building on the pictures that were sent to me. So through to you, Ken, the structure that you sent out in your pictures showed a masonry gate. Is that the thing you're talking about that is from the 1800s?
Through you. Good afternoon, Ken. Can you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Ken Coit, Manager of Heritage and Urban Design. Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, there's a white gate on the left side of Lime Kiln, or the west side of Lime Kiln as you're heading up to the end of the street, and that is the property in question. There's a long winding road that leads up to a hill to a building that was constructed in the 1960s, and then looks like it had a number of rather large additions and changes to it over the years. That is the property in question.
So the only piece that has the 1850s, I'm just scanning the email, I'll say 1850s, yeah, that was what's in your email. Was the concrete gate?
Through you, Madam Chair. No, the gates were part of the 1960s property. To the east is another large estate property. That is the property that is on the heritage inventory, not register, heritage inventory, and that's, my understanding, is the property that contains the 1850 stone house, and that is not in question as part of this demolition application at the moment.
Okay, all I'm trying to do is avoid the outrage that I think everyone felt across the city, because I got tons of emails on it, at the issuing of a demolition permit without any controls on it for the Brandon house. And I'm looking at your aerial photo, Ken, right now, and that I don't see a second structure there or a second estate lot. What I see is a large home, which I believe is the one I was in. That was the homestead for the Firestone family. Can you point out in that picture you circulated where the second home is? Because I can't see it.
It's actually not in the image, because the estate lot that is to the east is so large that the stone house is actually off of that image to the left, again along a long driveway.
Councillor?
Okay. So I hope staff are prepared to take the heat as this is demolished and the outrage that would pour out again from my community. I would love to have our heritage staff at least take a look at it before the demolition permit is issued. I did see the report from the Niagara Escarpment Commission that Steve sent through, and they're approving it, but they don't have I don't believe, a heritage mandate for structures in what they do. So my question to somebody on staff is, can we hold off on the demolition permit until a member of the heritage staff can take a look at it? And I would love to go with them if I can, but I'm not sure what the rules are in this. And someone can coach me, I'd appreciate it.
So do we have somebody from the building department that, oh, hello, George. How are you?
Good.
Please introduce yourself.
George Caetano, Manager, Plan Examination, Building Division. In answer to, through the chair, in answer to that question, under the delegated authority under the demolition control bylaw, we have to, when the new house is issued, we'd have to issue the demolition permit at the same time. At this point, you can't hold back issuance of the permit, provided they comply with all applicable law. In this case, it's not a heritage building, the one that they were demolishing, according to our records. I think Ken's saying the same. It's basically, it sounds like it's a 6,000 square foot home that they want to demolish and replace it with a new one. So
Are they
that's
going to
where we are
replace
right
it
now.
with a new one, George, or a subdivision?
No, they've applied for a building permit to build a new 7,700 square foot home on that property. So they're proposing to build a new home on the location of the existing one.
Counselor?
Okay, so you're really saying, George, I'm powerless to do anything about this?
Well, at this point, there's, like I was saying, the information they've given us, they comply with. Once we review it, we still got, I think, till the end of the month before we get to it. But once we review it and they comply with all applicable law, there's not, we can't hold back issuance unless council designates the property or they do something to designate the building under the Heritage Act, right?
Thank you. Counselor?
I see Jason's turned his camera on.
Yes, and through you, Madam Chair, I was just going to suggest that, we can have, heritage staff take a closer look. We sort of did as much as we could in the little bit of time we've had today. We can certainly have heritage planning staff take a closer look and follow up with you, Councillor Ferguson, to confirm some of those responses that Ken gave in terms of what our understanding is of the scope of the demolition permit, the new building permit, and the 1850s heritage building that is on site. So we can certainly follow up. As one thing to add to what George noted, the other thing we were just trying to determine is whether or not a site plan approval may be required as well for this property prior to the issuance of the building permit. So we will have to investigate that a little bit further. But if that's the case, then there'll be a fair bit of time before the building permit is in a position to be issued. But we would still have to confirm that. Through the chair to Councillor Ferguson, if you'd like to have heritage staff take a closer look, we're happy to do that, and we can follow up with the councillor offline in terms of the specifics of what is subject to the demolition permit and what are the heritage buildings that may be adjacent to or on site.
Well, that's great, Jason. That seems like a perfect solution. If I could just satisfy my own conscience, because I think there'll be some pushback on it. I may be wrong. And, if you have to go through a site plan, of course, that takes quite a while. So we do have some time. So would it be Ken that I would meet with, or Lisa Golding? Who would you recommend that? Or maybe Ken can set it up with whoever he thinks the right person is. And I guess, do we need the owner's permission to go up there, Jason, do you know?
So through the chair to access the property, yes, I believe that would be the case.
So Ken, if you can hear me, if you could set something up and we'll just go take a look. I just don't want the outcry, and there's still a lot of angry people over the Brandon House was issued a demolition permit because it had no heritage value. Nothing had been put on it, and I don't want to make the same mistake twice. And now if it is in 1960s, it's going to be difficult to I suspect, and I'm not a heritage person, heritage expert, it's going to be difficult to put a heritage designation on it if it's a 1960s structure. And I can't imagine how long it'd take to vacuum an 8,000 square foot house either. That's a huge thing that's going back up again.
I don't vacuum, so don't ask me. Oh, sorry.
You got a hot mic?
live.
And if you could set that up, I'd appreciate it, just so I can clear my conscience, be ready for the community pushback should it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm glad we had that opportunity. So, Councillor Danko, you asked earlier about Century Manor, so I'm going to, and Ken's still online, so.
Thank you. Sorry,
Go ahead.
just kind of chuckling about a 7,000 square foot house. Considering our discussion that we just had, you could fit more than 10 full-size family units into that. Anyway.
All 10 of my houses.
My question through you, Madam Chair, is, and I appreciate the opportunity in other businesses, that Infrastructure Ontario had a meeting with the Heritage Committee where they presented some additional heritage protections that could be put in place for the Century Manor property while it is being sold by the provincial government. And then subsequently, we had a meeting directly with representatives from Infrastructure Ontario that was really positive and really helpful, in my opinion. And I'm just wondering through you to Director Coit, is I believe there was specific recommendations that came from the Heritage Committee to work towards implementation of those additional heritage measures, and I'm just wondering when we will see that at Planning Committee or what the process is.
Through you, Madam Chair. That's correct, Councillor. At the last Municipal Heritage Committee, staff did receive a direction to work with IO and work with the information that IO provided to update the Century Manor designation and add cultural landscape aspects to it. The IO has done a lot of that work for us, but because the property's in provincial ownership, we cannot designate it until it is sold. So we, as per our meeting with IO, it is our understanding that that will not happen until the late fall or new year. So we are looking to come back to committee as soon as possible after the election with that information designation ready to go, to be approved, and we will work with IO around the timing so that it can be done as soon as possible and coordinated with the sale of the property and when the property's back in non-provincial ownership.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the work that's necessary in order to bring that forward in the fall or early in the new year 2023, you have all the direction that you need right now to proceed?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we do. And IO has provided us with a fairly robust heritage analysis that we can use that will help move that further very quickly.
Thank you. Very much appreciate that. And just to reiterate, really, truly appreciate the work that Infrastructure Ontario and the support that they have for the heritage protections on that property. I've been critical of the provincial government when I think they've deserved it, but it was a very positive discussion that we had, and really looking forward to those additional permissions coming forward following the election. Thank you.
Thank you. And no other business for other committee members. I'm going straight to the GM, Jason Thorne, for an update, please, if there's any.
And through you, Madam Chair, no, I don't have any updates for committee today.
Thank you very much, sir. I don't see any speakers, and Lisa said it was going to be 1 o'clock. Okay, so private and confidential. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Pearson. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Ferguson, to receive and approve the minutes of May the 3rd, 2022 closed session. Please vote accordingly. And then we're going to vote for an adjournment, and I'm sure everybody would like to move that. Seconded by everyone else. To adjourn. Please don't leave till you adjourn. I'm sorry. I believe I had Councillor Pearson, Councillor Ferguson.
Yep. Great.
And now we're adjourning. Goodbye, everybody.
Super. Day's due and done.